Today, the House Oversight Committee is holding its first hearing on the massive fraud in Minnesota's social services program. Minnesota's social services, which are funded by you, the American taxpayer, are being ripped off. The most vulnerable are suffering as a result. Federal prosecutors estimate that these criminals have stolen at least $9 billion. The fraudsters, many of whom are from Minnesota's Somali community, have stolen from programs meant to feed needy kids, provide services to autistic children, house low-income and disabled Americans, and provide health care to vulnerable Medicaid recipients. Fraudsters like these take millions to enrich themselves while providing nothing, overstating or outright faking the services. How many children have gone hungry because fraudsters stole money that was intended to provide them with food? How many autistic children were denied services because fraudsters instead sent this money overseas? How many low-income seniors, people with disabilities, or those with mental illnesses were denied access to housing because fraudsters drained resources and pocketed the money for themselves? The breadth and depth of this fraud is breathtaking, and I fear that this is just the tip of the iceberg. The U.S. Department of Justice is already investigating another Minnesota service program after a disabled man battling drug addiction under the care of a fraudulent full-time provider died because of neglect. Governor Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Minnesota's Democrat leadership have either been asleep at the wheel or complicit in these crimes. How could they allow this massive fraud to go on for years? This is why we're here today. We must expose this theft of taxpayer dollars and hold everybody accountable who let it happen. Today, we're joined by witnesses from Minnesota State House of Representatives who have been fighting this fight for years. These legislators are on the front lines, uncovering fraud in Minnesota's social services programs day in and day out and trying to get their state agencies to fix it. Thank you all for what you're doing to uncover the truth. This isn't just a Minnesota problem. It's a problem for taxpayers across the United States. About 35% of Minnesota's budget comes from federal grants. 35% of Minnesota's budget comes from federal grants. Hardworking Americans pay those taxes, and that money is being funneled to fraudsters, funding luxury homes, fancy cars, and vacations abroad. Some of it is even allegedly going overseas to support terrorists. And yet, Governor Walz, Attorney General Ellison, and Minnesota Democrats failed to act despite countless warnings. They failed Minnesotans and all Americans, handing millions of taxpayer dollars to fraudsters. They failed children and others in Minnesota. They failed their own state employees, some of whom have come forward as whistleblowers. These whistleblowers have told us that the Walz administration retaliated against employees who warned and alerted the administration to the fraud occurring within these social services programs. Again, Governor Walz accused employees who were simply doing their jobs of racism, Islamophobia, and threatened surveillance to silence them. President Trump and his administration are taking a whole-of-government approach and prosecuting these fraudsters. To date, the U.S. Department of Justice has charged 98 defendants in Minnesota fraud-related cases, 85 of whom are of Somali descent. 64 have already been convicted. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security is on the ground conducting investigations of suspected fraud sites in Minnesota. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has frozen child care payments and started requiring documentation to prove entities are indeed providing child care. Other federal agencies are halting grant programs, investigating public housing fraud, and strengthening program eligibility requirements. The American people demand jail time for those who stole their hard-earned money and accountability for officials who sat by as resources were drained. Congress must ensure there is change and accountability so this does not happen again. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. Americans, thank you all for exposing this critical issue. And with that, I yield to Ranking Member Garcia for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. I just want to start by thanking, of course, our witnesses for being here today and for all the members being back. We all agree, I think everyone on both sides of the aisle can agree, that fraud is a threat at every level of government, in every private sector business, and to every single American. Fraud exists everywhere. When I was mayor of my hometown in Long Beach, we worked for better and more efficient government and took on fraud whenever it existed and wherever it appeared to protect taxpayers. It's something that all of us take seriously every single day. When we find fraud, we should punish people and those that are committing it against the American public, especially when it damages services that people rely on. Now, what we should not do is use fraud as an excuse to rip away aid from innocent people who follow the rules and need help in our society. We should fight fraud when people rip off programs designed to help working families. And also, we should fight fraud when large corporations and wealthy individuals dodge their own taxes and rig the system for their own benefit. And especially, we should fight fraud when figures in our government, particularly those in power within the White House or our agencies, get rich and profit from their offices. Fraud is never acceptable, and it undermines public trust, whoever commits it. But let's remember that some of the worst fraud and corruption is actually found at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Republicans like to talk about fraud in states with Democratic governors, oftentimes exclusively. But Republicans also have a president who has pardoned or reduced jail time for 25 criminals convicted of fraud in this year alone. Now, some of these fraudsters have made also huge campaign contributions to Donald Trump. And worst of all, Trump's pardons mean that these criminals can avoid paying back more than $1 billion, which they owe their victims, and dwarfs much of the fraud that the House majority wants to talk about today. This is actually the opposite of accountability. Instead, the House majority wants to excuse and cut programs, which they have done from the start. Now, Donald Trump's signature law cut money for health care and food programs. Medicaid and CHIP help almost half the kids in the United States see a doctor. And that we lost, of course, $1 trillion in those programs. Over 10 million people could lose health care. Trump's law also cut 40 million people who use SNAP. And this includes, by the way, 1 out of every 5 kids. And this is happening not just in Minnesota. The president plans to freeze more than $10 billion for child care subsidies, social services, and cash support for low-income families in Minnesota, New York, Colorado, Illinois, and my home state of California. Of course, we know these states have Democratic governors that Donald Trump wants to punish. And we should look at those consequences if we want to talk about fraud. In Minnesota, which we're talking about today, Donald Trump is removing child care funding for the entire state. That frozen funding provides child care for over 18,000 kids. These kids didn't commit fraud. So I want to know why they should be punished. Last night, he said he's withholding all possibly Medicaid funds from Minnesota, which could harm 1 in 5 residents. Now, in New York, another state he's threatening, that's over 66,000 innocent kids, while pardoning, of course, 25 fraudsters and robbing victims of over $1 billion. Donald Trump should have to face the kids and parents who will be hurt, even though they've done nothing wrong. I want to know what the president and the House majority expect the parents of these kids to do. Many don't seem to care. He wants to pardon and protect more rich crooks and fraudsters who have robbed over $1 billion from innocent people. Now, in California, in my home state, this threatens over 176,000 kids. 176,000 kids. Well, he continues, of course, to pardon fraudsters and connected folks that have donated immense amounts of money to his campaign. Now, this hurts not just Democratic families, but Republican families. It's innocent kids, regardless of political party, who need child care. We are in an affordability crisis, and the majority is not going after the real fraud that's being committed to the American public. Now, in Illinois, he has threatened funding for more than 62,000 kids. 62,000 kids. And finally, in Colorado, the other state that he's going after, more than 16,000 kids will lose funding. But we know, of course, that the president will let his friends get away with crime. And I want to point out one last thing, which is so important. While Donald Trump attacks these states, the Wall Street Journal on Monday reported a massive Mississippi scandal. Mississippi, of course, isn't on Trump's list. We don't have witnesses from Mississippi here today. Oversight Republicans aren't calling in Governor Tate. And I think the question is, why? We have real fraud happening, yet there's zero interest, apparently, in what's happening here in Mississippi and other places. Republicans want to cut benefits and attack states with Democratic governors. And what it's done, particularly in places like Minnesota, it has unleashed bigotry and hate. Minnesota child care centers have become the target of harassment and even vandalism and theft. Parents are afraid to drop their kids off in the morning and go to work. This is an opportunity, again, to attack for the House majority and smear innocent people without evidence. If we cared about fraud, we'd be starting at the very top. This is critical for the country and to actually take on fraud and abuse and the fraudsters that are being pardoned across the United States. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I would like to now welcome our witnesses here today. First, we have Kristen Robbins, Chairwoman of the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee and representative for District 37A in the Minnesota House of Representatives. Welcome. Next, we have Walter Hudson, a member of the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee and representative for Minnesota's District 30A. Next, we have Marion Rarick, a member of Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee and representative for District 29B in Minnesota. Lastly, we have Brendan Ballou, a former special counsel at the Department of Justice. So thank you all for joining us, and we look very forward to your testimony today. This is an issue the American people are very interested in. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you all, and you may take a seat. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements, and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes have expired, and we would ask that you please wrap up. I now recognize Representative Robbins for her opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you for inviting us to testify. As chair of the Fraud Prevention Committee in Minnesota, I've been working to uncover the massive fraud under Tim Walz, propose solutions, and hold state agencies accountable. Today, I will highlight the scale of the problem, outline the work our committee is doing to fight the fraud, and provide a roadmap for other states on how to detect and stop fraud. Minnesota is one of the highest tax states in the nation, and hardworking Minnesotans have been told that they don't pay their fair share for years. In truth, Minnesotans pay much more in taxes than in other states. And when they pay their taxes, they expect that their money is going to things that help our communities: roads, schools, healthcare, and law enforcement. They do not want their tax dollars absconded by criminals to buy resorts and apartment buildings in Kenya, property in Turkey, and luxury homes and cars in the U.S. Tim Walz and his administration have willfully turned a blind eye to crime in the face of countless whistleblower and auditor reports, as well as stories by local investigative journalists and the Center of the American Experiment. These are actual crimes that must be punished. They are crimes against our moral values and erode trust in government. The time for accountability and justice is here. First, we are unearthing staggering amounts of fraud in Minnesota. As far back as 2014, there were credible whistleblower allegations of millions in daycare fraud. Instead of shutting it down, the state minimized whistleblower reports and allowed fraud to grow. Unfortunately, childcare fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Since 2019, Tim Walz and Minnesota Democrats have allowed fraud to absolutely explode in Minnesota. There's been more than $300 million in the Feeding Our Future child nutrition program scandal, and the Feeding Our Future prosecutions revealed that as many as half of those indicted also ran other Medicaid-funded programs. Yet despite this being known back in 2023, Tim Walz and his agencies have done nothing to stop those defendants from getting additional state money. We have now found fraud in multiple Medicaid programs, including autism centers, sober homes, non-emergency medical transportation, integrated community supports, and housing stabilization. Just last month, our committee held a hearing on credible allegations of fraud in 2 new areas: adult day services and assisted living. First U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, the leading prosecutor in these cases from the Biden administration and the Trump administration, says the fraud could be an astronomical $9 billion. In the face of mounting reports and literal criminal indictments and convictions, the Walz administration has repeatedly and publicly denied or downplayed the fraud. Just last January, the commissioner of DHS, Jody Harpstead, who'd been on the job for 5.5 years, said, "There's a lot more rumors of fraud than there is actual fraud." You cannot make this up. The Walz administration has been gaslighting Minnesotans on the scale of the fraud problem for years. In response, when Republicans took control or ended Democrat control of the Minnesota House last year, we created the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee. Since last February, we have held 15 hearings where we have grilled officials, exposed new areas of fraud, and repeatedly flagged failures in internal controls. I authored a new law to expand whistleblower protection, and we created a portal, mnfraud.com, resulting in a surge of new whistleblower reports that our amazing staff is still working through. Under the leadership of our Vice Chair, Patty Anderson, we passed a bipartisan bill in the Senate to create an independent Office of Inspector General. When it got to the House, Democrats killed it because the DHS commissioner testified against it. The Tim Walz administration has utterly failed to protect Minnesota taxpayers and vulnerable citizens, ignoring years of credible reports and retaliating against those who spoke up, often by claiming they were racist or Islamophobic. Tim Walz and the Democrats have repeatedly protected their political base at the expense of all Minnesotans. Other states should learn from the failures of the Walz administration. So I'll give you a quick roadmap on how to find and stop fraud. First, culture matters. Fraud flourishes when leaders ignore it and criminals see they can get away with it. Second, fraud flourishes when basic internal controls are not followed. This is not complicated. Third, you have to look at the interconnections of relationships in businesses in multiple program areas in Medicaid. It's a huge red flag that has been ignored in our state. Finally, it is important to say what is true and to stand up against fake allegations of racism or Islamophobia. Crime is crime, no matter who is committing it. It is true that the majority of the fraud in Minnesota has taken place in the Somali community. And it is also true that some of our best whistleblowers are from the Somali community. Democrats refuse to acknowledge this truth, and that has enabled criminals to steal billions and hurt our vulnerable citizens. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to share the lessons from Minnesota and for your help in investigating these crimes. The time for justice and accountability is now.
I now recognize Representative Hudson for his opening statement.
Chairman, ranking member, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today for the record. I am Minnesota State Representative Walter Hudson, a second-term member who sits on our House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee. The recent national conversation about fraud in Minnesota has been fraught with distractions, diverting from critical concerns regarding process, policy, and oversight to sideshow concerns about personalities and partisan politics. My role here today is to cut through all of that and provide you with a clear picture of a culture which has developed over many years around the several generous benefit programs which Minnesota provides to our residents. Well-documented oversight failures have led to a lack of program integrity, creating incentives for people to monetize programs beyond their legislative intent to turn benefits into business. Contrary to the claim just made by the ranking member that there is no evidence of this fraud, attached to my written testimony, you will find a document which collates several reports made over the past 15 years by Minnesota's nonpartisan Office of Legislative Auditor, along with transcripts of each of our hearings from the Fraud Committee, where we heard directly from staff and leaders within the state agencies which administer these programs. Here's what that record indicates. Within the state of Minnesota, government oversight has been unable to keep up with program expansion due to a combination of factors. One, rapid expansion of funding and provider participation. 2, payment systems that prioritize access and speed. 3, verification mechanisms that occur after funds are distributed. 4, oversight capacity that does not scale with spending. And 5, diffuse accountability across agencies and contractors. This combination of factors has fostered a booming new sector of the economy that relies upon the continuation of and expansion of government programs to fuel private sector profits. I want to be clear. Even when the law is being followed precisely by every jot and tittle, incentives still exist to abuse these programs and waste taxpayer dollars by diverting funding to profit centers rather than providing a safety net for those in temporary need. Now, criminal fraud is rampant. Deputy U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, serving the District of Minnesota, has said that he could keep 1,000 prosecutors busy. But he's limited to a mere 25, only 5 of which are tasked with building fraud cases. He estimates that the total amount of criminal fraud over 5 years may reach $9 billion, which is fully 1/2 of the money that has been directed to these programs by the state. While Governor Tim Walz and other stakeholders dispute that assessment, the point I wish to emphasize is this. Whatever the actual number is, the full scope of the problem is not just criminal fraud, but a culture of profiting from government programs in perpetuity, not as a safety net, but as an industry. I have personally met and had discussions with folks who identify themselves as consultants for multiple entities accepting government benefits. They have made a career out of showing people how to leverage the gaps in government oversight to maximize benefit payments. Now, such conduct may not actually break the law, and that's the point. We have a system whereby an entire industry can operate under the color of law, raking in tremendous profits for individuals, all while having no incentive to save the taxpayer money or lift legitimate beneficiaries out of need. Instead, as the market for funneling benefits into businesses increases, so too does the perceived need for benevolent services. If nothing changes, if oversight is not tightened, if incentives are not changed, spending on these programs will only continue to increase with no commensurate increase in either public good or public confidence in our governing institutions. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony for the record. I look forward to answering what questions I can.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Rarick for her opening statement.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. For the record, my name is Marian Rarick, and I am currently serving in the Minnesota House of Representatives in House District 29B. I am a member on the Minnesota House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee, which was recently formed in January of 25. I was first asked to serve on the committee on January 4th, and soon after, the 5 Republican members began to meet. During one of those discussions, I was asked to reach out to the Department of Human Services whistleblowers on X, now called Minnesota Staff Fraud Reporting Commentary. I had been following them in the previous year. I reached out through a direct tweet on X on January 16th, and the very same day I got a response back that yes, they would be willing to speak to the Fraud Prevention Committee. Since that first contact, Chair Robbins and I and Representative Hudson have had multiple conference calls with them, and we have had one in-person meeting. At that meeting, they were both former and current employees. I've continued to message with them very often, sometimes daily, and their collective message has been completely consistent. Instead of focusing on fraudsters, DHS leadership instead focused its surveillance on employees. Since then, their expressed fear of retaliation has intensified under an avalanche of fraud in Minnesota. Their numbers have grown from 480 DHS employees, both current and former, to over 1,000 across multiple state agencies. They have told me repeatedly how grateful they are to the House Fraud Prevention Committee for focusing our attention on fraud in the state programs, using their inside information while keeping them completely protected. They have explained that they live in a constant state of fear of retaliation. One only has to look at what happened to Faye Bernstein to understand why. In a very recent Newsweek article dated December 13th of 25, Ms. Bernstein, a former compliance specialist, stated, Minnesota DHS functions in the opposite manner as you would think. Employees who suggest improvements or, heaven forbid, report fraud then face significant retaliation. The messenger is shot. In 2019, Bernstein said she alerted Minnesota DHS officials to sloppy contracting practices that were not legally compliant. But it's not what most people would even consider fraud. She says she was later escorted out of the building, faced lengthy investigation, got trespassed from all DHS owned and leased properties, and received an involuntary transfer to another state agency. So she says, so today if someone asks me, should I report fraud within DHS, I say no, no, no. It is career suicide plus a whole lot more. So let's talk about that plus a whole lot more. In our face-to-face meetings with a group of whistleblowers, they revealed that retaliation now includes threats of being fired with cause, which means you do not get unemployment insurance in the state of Minnesota, being blacklisted from all state agencies, and I would note most likely our largest counties as well, which are Democrat-run. And then there was a veiled threat of the use of military intelligence against them. They later informed me that it was discovered that in some targeted employees or suspected whistleblowers' personnel files were pictures of their homes and their cars. They also described that supervisors asked them questions about their families that to them felt like a threat. One example was, we need to know where your kids go to school and where their bus stops are. I will also note that whistleblowers we spoke to described many times that DHS used surveillance programs to surveil employees' emails and chats and other communications, looking for keywords like fraud, double billing, underspending, and overpayments. One example that the whistleblowers let me know about Lieutenant Governor Flanagan. April 12th, 2024. Flanagan comes to a DHS Health and Human Services Equity Conference at the Heritage Center and Brooklyn Center. On stage, Flanagan acknowledges the X account and the fraud concerns it raised and publicly denounced the X users and called them weirdos and losers sitting in their mother's basement. This was in a public setting with hundreds of participants and it elicited gasps among the crowd. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Ballou for his opening statement.
Thank you. My name is Brennan Ballou. I'm a former federal prosecutor and a native Minnesotan. Like all Minnesotans, like all Americans who have heard this story, I am deeply distressed by the fraud on the state's social service programs. Most notably, in 2022, the Department of Justice indicted 47 people for stealing an estimated $246 million in funds meant to feed children during the COVID-19 pandemic. As late as 2025, 78 people have been indicted as part of the scheme and 56 have pleaded guilty. More recently, the department has charged over a dozen people for stealing $14 million from a program meant for children with autism and millions more from a program meant to help disabled Minnesotans maintain stable housing. This is heartbreaking for several reasons. At the most basic level, money meant for the neediest among us, the hungry, the disabled, the destitute, was stolen. I fear that skepticism of Minnesota's social safety net, one of the things that makes the state great, will grow, and it will be harder to fund these programs in the future. And I fear that the actions of a few people will be used to demonize an entire population of Somali and East African Minnesotans who overwhelmingly have made the state more vibrant, more diverse, and more prosperous. I also fear the selective interest in fraud in America, because at the same time that these crimes are rightly being investigated by state and federal authorities, the larger infrastructure for prosecuting fraud and white-collar crime is being dismantled. Let me give you a few examples. In February 2025, the Department of Justice paused enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits foreign bribery and criminal violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which, as the name suggests, prohibits acting as a secret agent of a foreign power. Between February and April of last year, the department disbanded its Klepto Capture Task Force, which enforced sanctions against Russian oligarchs, and the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team. And last year, the department forced out most of the lawyers of the Public Integrity Section, which prosecutes crimes by government officials, announced plans to dismantle the Tax Division, which prosecutes tax evasion, and shuttered the FBI task force that investigated congressional misconduct. More than just dismantling infrastructure for pursuing violations of the law, the government is, for favored defendants, appearing to enable it. In 2024, the Justice Department indicted Andrew Wiederhorn, the CEO of a casual fast food chain, for allegedly stealing $47 million from his own company. After his business donated $100,000 to the Trump inaugural committee, his case was dropped, and the line-level prosecutor on his case was fired. In 2021, the department sued Boeing for deceiving the government about the software that caused 2 plane crashes, killing 346 people. After donating $1 million to the inaugural committee, Boeing negotiated a favorable deferred prosecution agreement that the judge overseeing the case said, quote, fails to secure the necessary accountability to ensure the safety of the flying public. But he felt compelled by precedent to accept it nevertheless. The examples continue. Banks that contributed to the inaugural committee had litigations against them for violating consumer financial protection laws dropped, and so too did cryptocurrency companies that were investigated and sued by the Securities and Exchange Commission and who contributed to the inaugural committee. Crucially, those crypto companies that did not donate to the committee or other affiliated entities remain defendants of the government. The scale of these frauds involve millions stolen and hundreds killed, and yet they have received a fraction of the attention of the fraud that happened in Minnesota. This concerns me because we are both dismantling our infrastructure for fighting fraud and providing a roadmap for how those fraudsters who are prosecuted can buy their way out of justice. While we need to pursue the fraud we're seeing in Minnesota's social safety programs for all the reasons I said, because it is the weakest among us who are being harmed, we cannot selectively show an interest in fraud. If we do, we put some people, the very powerful and the very rich, beyond the reach of the law. Thank you.
Thank you all for your opening statements. We'll now begin the questioning portion of the hearing, and our chair recognizes Mr. Gill from Texas for the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing so expeditiously. We all know this is an important issue, not just in terms of welfare fraud, but also immigration more broadly. So we appreciate it, and thank you for the witnesses for taking the time to come here. I want to start with you, Mr. Balu. Again, thank you for being here. Let me ask you, does large-scale Somali immigration make Minnesota stronger or weaker?
Certainly stronger.
Certainly stronger. Do you know what percentage of Somali-headed households in Minnesota are on food stamps?
No.
54%. Do you know what that number is for native Minnesota-headed households?
Well, to be clear, a majority of the...
It's 7%. There's a big difference between 54% and 7%, is there not?
Excuse me, sir, could I answer the question?
Let me move on. We've got a lot of questions here. What percentage of Somali-headed households in Minnesota are on Medicaid?
I don't know.
It's 73%. Do you know what that number is for Minnesota native households?
Again, you're using the phrase Minnesota native households, but the majority...
The number is 18%. That's quite an astounding difference. I think we would agree.
Can I answer the question, please?
Let me ask you one more, and then we can go on to that. What percentage of Somali-headed households are on welfare in general?
I don't know.
It's 81%. What about, let me just ask you, after 10 years of being in the United States, what percentage of Somali immigrant households continue to be on welfare?
I don't know.
The number is 78%. So even after 10 years, 78% of Somali immigrant households continue to be on welfare. Do you know what that number is for native Minnesota-headed households?
Again, you're using the phrase,
non-Somali immigrant-headed households.
if I can just answer the question, when you're using the phrase native Minnesotans, the majority of Somali Minnesotans are as Minnesotan as any of us. They were born in the United States. It's only 8,000 of the 108,000 Somalis.
And nevertheless, the welfare usage is astoundingly different. Let me ask you again, does that make Minnesota stronger or weaker?
Again, I'd like the opportunity to answer the question here. Again, the majority of Somali Minnesotans are born in the United States, as I understand it.
Okay, well, what percentage of working-age Somalians who have been in the U.S. for 10 years or more, how many of them speak English very well?
I don't know.
About half. The answer is about half. That seems pretty low, doesn't it?
Again, I keep trying to...
It doesn't sound like something that makes our country stronger to me, and I think most Americans would agree with me on that. I need to move on. Ms. Robbins, when would you say we concretely knew that widespread welfare fraud was occurring in Minnesota?
There have been reports since 2009 from the Office of Legislative Auditor. I would say the credible reports on child care fraud started surfacing 2011 to 2013.
So for over a decade?
Yes, sir.
When do you think Governor Walz knew about this fraud?
From the very beginning. He was running for governor in 2018 when there were prosecutions going on, when there was an OLA report, active cases in the news all the time.
And what was the Walz administration's response?
They actually did nothing when they got into office, and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan had been on the committee in the legislature that had hearings on child care fraud, and when they got into office, they did put $5 million into a little more money, but nothing changed. But
nothing. And let me ask you, Mr. Hudson, thank you for being here. Did those who commit this fraud, do they typically vote for Republicans or Democrats, in your opinion?
In my opinion, thank you for qualifying like that, I would say they most definitely overwhelmingly vote for Democrats.
Do they typically donate to Republicans or Democrats?
Not to my knowledge. They
don't
donate to Republicans, they donate to Democrats, in my opinion, yes.
Got it. So would you say this is the Somali population is an important demographic for Democrats to win over politically?
Unquestionably.
Got it. And do you think it would have hurt Democrats' political standing with the Somali population to investigate this fraud?
Very clearly.
Got it. So in other words, you're saying that there was a political incentive to cover up widespread Somali fraud. Is that right?
100%.
Got it. Let me ask all three of you. Did the Walz administration and Democrats intentionally, in your opinion, overlook this fraud while it was happening for political gain? I'll start with you, Ms. Robbins.
Absolutely. We have credible whistleblower reports that the Department of Human Services administration up to the OIG and the commissioner met with a group called the Minnesota Minority Child Care Association multiple times, and that they were trying to weaken protections. We wanted, we had several changes we wanted to do, and they opposed all of them.
And Mr. Hudson and Ms. Rarick, and then my time is up.
I would agree.
Absolutely. The whistleblowers confirm it.
Got it. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Garcia.
Thank you. I just want to clarify one thing. I just want to just be very clear that a vast majority of those Somali Minnesotans are United States citizens, and Somali Americans have as much right to access those services, or any Somalis, as United States members of Congress. They have the same right to access services, and we're talking about U.S. citizens. Let me also just clarify, Mr. Hudson, you said in your opening remarks that I had said that no fraud exists, and I think you can feel free to run the tape. That's not exactly not what I said. What I have been talking about, what's important for us to remember, is that wherever fraud exists, we should take it on, and we should hold folks accountable. And when people commit fraud and people get hurt, there's going to be repercussions, as there should be. We can all agree to that. We want to hold fraudsters accountable. We want to protect the victims and innocent people, so that those that can access services can continue to access services across this country. That's how it should work. But we also know that's not how it should work according to President Trump. Now, let's actually talk about real fraud and some fraudsters. Now, we all know that recently, here in Florida, President Trump granted a get-out-of-jail-free pardon to Philip S. Forms. Now, Mr. S. Forms is a nursing home mogul convicted of schemes to defraud Medicare and Medicaid of $1.3 billion. Where is that hearing? This guy just didn't steal from taxpayers. He took advantage of thousands of people, admitting them to nursing homes and living facilities that could not help them. His network of doctors gave out dangerous and harmful treatments and prescribing opioids to drug addicts just to make more money. In 2019, when S-Forms was sentenced, Trump's own DOJ issued a press release that quoted that the man behind one of the biggest healthcare frauds in history will be spending 20 years in prison. 20 years in prison, the DOJ said. Just 14 months later, Donald Trump let him walk free with a pardon. In October of this year, on his 56th birthday, S-Forms was arrested on domestic violence charges. Let's look at another case, another Trump case. Joseph Schwartz, he was sentenced for taking advantage of nursing home residents and workers and defrauding the government of $38 million. Where is that hearing? Schwartz paid lobbyists almost $1 million to secure a pardon from the president, and it worked. In November of this last year, a full and unconditional pardon was granted by President Trump for this enormous amount of fraud. Now let's look at Paul Walzak, a tax cheat whose crimes cost taxpayers almost $1.1 billion, dwarfing what we're talking about today, as he made lavish purchases like a $1 million luxury yacht. Now, Mr. Walzak was supposed to spend 18 months in prison, a fraudster who we want to go after. He should have been held accountable for his crimes. And he was supposed to pay $4.4 million back to the taxpayers. While this pardon application was pending, his mom was invited to a $1 million per person candlelight dinner at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump. She attended, and less than 3 weeks later, her son received a full and unconditional pardon. Now, I'm assuming that our witnesses here today would think this is horrific fraud and would disagree with these pardons. I'd like to do you agree with this pardon? I'd like to begin with our witnesses.
Sir, I've not looked at the facts of the case or the law, so I cannot make a statement on that.
So you can't make a statement on these pardons. You haven't read anything about them in the news, apparently. These are pardons to criminals and fraudsters that our witnesses clearly have no interest in. Now, in Trump's America, rich people can rip innocent people off whenever they want and get a pardon. And the answer to fraud here is to cut off benefits to innocent people. Most of these folks are innocent people and kids who just need their services. Donald Trump's decision to freeze $10 billion in social services funding to 5 states does not hold criminals accountable. It hurts the very people who are harmed by fraud in the first place. Mr. Ballou, just finally, you are from Minnesota yourself. How are Minnesotans on the ground being hurt by Trump's political retribution crusade?
Well, the practical effect is that the pause on payments for child care services and Medicaid services are going to result in hundreds of thousands of the neediest Minnesotans being denied, in some cases, literally life-saving payments.
And also, as we've been discussing here, there is a large, of course, immigrant community and a community that makes Minnesota stronger. Can you tell us how innocent people in the Somali community are being directly harmed?
Well, you hear about the threats that are happening against the Somali community. You're hearing about the broad demonization that's happening against them in the media generally. I think, I know we're running out of time here, but, if you look at the statistics, I believe it's 82 Somali Americans have been indicted so far. Out of 108,000 Somali Minnesotans in the state overall, that's something like a 0.07% criminal rate. When you compare that to 1/3 of all Americans have a criminal record, and I think it's 40% or approximately of white men under the age of 23 have been arrested. I don't think the statistics really compare.
Thank you, sir, and I yield back.
Without objection, House Majority Whip Emmer, Representatives Finstad, Fishback, and Stauber of Minnesota are waived on the committee for purpose of questioning the witnesses at today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman,
Chair
I
now
seek
recognizes-
recognition to make 2 motions for subpoenas.
I was going to recognize the whip, but if you have a motion or state your...
I'd like to make a motion to subpoena Neville Singham, a U.S. billionaire with reported ties to the CCP that's been funding extremist organizations, fueling division and civil unrest in this country, especially regarding the ICE riots last summer, as well as I'd like to make a motion to subpoena the ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt for stifling free speech by listing the phrase America First as hate speech and Turning Point USA as a hate group.
A motion has been made. The committee will hold this motion in abeyance until the end of the committee hearing. The committee will now proceed with today's hearing.
On point of order, Mr. Chairman, will we get a written copy of that? Because that was a lot to go through.
Okay, yeah, we'll work with Representative Luna and get a copy.
Thank you.
All right. Chair now recognizes Majority Whip from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer.
Thank you, Chairman Comer, for holding this important hearing. As I said on Monday, good riddance to Governor Walz, but he cannot escape accountability for the estimated $9 billion in fraud. How did this happen? And where the hell has the Twin Cities media been? The Star Tribune is complicit. They have had this story for years, if you just heard, and they've refused to report anything on it. In fact, they continue to try and cover up. Our Minnesota Republican colleagues have demanded answers and accountability for years, but have seen nothing from Walz, his administration, our Democrat colleagues like Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, Ilhan Omar, and Angie Craig, or the worthless Star Tribune. Thank God for President Donald J. Trump for finally bringing attention to this issue. Representative Rarick, I'm going to begin with you. You've been working on this issue for years. You've spoken to the whistleblowers personally. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You have an understanding that 1,000 whistleblowers running an account on X have come forward to expose fraud in Minnesota state agencies, and they have been entirely ignored by Tim Walz and have even been retaliated against. Is that accurate?
That is correct. Even this morning, I got another message.
Well, in your experience, are their claims credible or are they politically motivated against Walz?
They are completely credible, not politically motivated.
In fact, many of these are Walz administration employees, correct?
They are actually Democrats as well.
Can you quickly give us one example of the retaliation these folks have been facing?
Yes, I can. In my opening statement, I mentioned that the most severe ones was that they would be fired with cause, so they couldn't have unemployment insurance, that they would be blacklisted from all state agencies, and I bet that it's also Hennepin County and Ramsey County, as you know, those are Democrat-run, and much, much more.
Based on what you've learned, Representative, over the last several years, do you have any doubt that Governor Tim Walz knew about this fraud as it was occurring?
He absolutely knew that it was occurring.
Thank you. The Housing Stability Services Program was estimated to cost about $2.6 million per year, but before it was shut down last October, it was on track to run about $122 million in 2025. In fact, I think they sucked $161 million out of it from the point it started in 2020 until it was finally shut down. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, and Joe Thompson believes that 90% of that was fraud.
Yeah. The Quality Leering Center, as uncovered by Nick Shirley, received almost $10 million in funding. Is that accurate?
I believe it is.
There are more than 80 autism centers in Minnesota under investigation. Is that true?
I believe it is, yes.
It's clear that someone is criminally complicit. You can't just let this amount of money get out of your administration over a period of 7 years without knowing. There was a hearing in the state regarding the fraudulent housing stabilization program, but before that hearing, Governor Walz fired the official who was slated to testify so that they could not testify and expose what was happening under Governor Walz's watch. Has Governor Walz or Attorney General Ellison fired anyone else to your knowledge, Representative?
Not to my knowledge, and that was Eric Rumdahl, and his administration believes that he was not fired, but I say he was fired because it was too convenient.
Right. Representative Hudson, is it true that 90% of the individuals charged, regardless of what your colleague on the panel just said with his facts and figures, 90% of the individuals charged or indicted with the $250 million Feeding Our Future COVID fraud are of Somali descent?
I believe that to be correct.
Are you aware that in a 2021 video, Mr. Ellison promised that he would obstruct his own agencies in their investigation of Somali fraud?
I am very much aware of that.
It's no wonder that criminals in the Somali community felt they were free to steal taxpayer dollars. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Marion. Do you have any doubt that Tim Walz knew about this fraud as it was occurring?
None whatsoever.
Walz and Ellison were protecting fraudsters instead of investigating them, and it was purposeful. And it's no coincidence that this is occurring largely in the Somali community. Walz made a sanctuary state, Minnesota, a sanctuary state. He gave free health care, free college, and free licenses to illegals. And Walz looked the other way when Somali immigrants were stealing. Representative Robbins, do you have any doubt that Tim Walz knew about this fraud as it was occurring?
None whatsoever.
So all three of you have no doubt in your minds that Tim Walz knew about the $9 billion of fraud during his tenure as governor and did nothing about it. It looks like my time is about to expire, and I do want to say to all of you, on behalf of Minnesota, thank you for being here, and justice will be served. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Whip. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Federal assistance programs are vital for keeping working families afloat and children healthy. Nearly 25% of adults and nearly 50% of children rely on federal assistance, including child care funding, Medicaid, and Children's Health Insurance Program, and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Fraudsters targeting government programs have a uniquely harmful impact on Americans. They deprive taxpayers of efficient use of their funds, deprive intended recipients and sometimes the most vulnerable groups in our society of the services and assistance they are eligible for, and they reduce the public trust in government. But answers to fraud is not to freeze critical safety net programs and cause more suffering for Americans who are already struggling to afford everyday expenses. I have worked with my colleagues on the Government Operations Subcommittee on ways that federal agencies can identify and prevent fraud before payments are made. My Oversight Committee Democrat colleagues and I are also proud co-sponsors of Congressional Men's Taxpayer Funds Oversight Accountability Act. This legislation would strengthen the ability of federal agencies to reliably track federal funds, enabling more efficient analysis to identify and stop fraudsters. We can continue to reduce fraud and protect funding from bad actors by empowering oversight bodies like Inspectors General and the Government Accountability Office, which are often best equipped to investigate red flags and sound the alarm when there are problems to address. Applying additional safeguards requires a balanced approach that does not pull the rug out from under people, including children, who rely on help these programs provide. Congress must not allow partisan actors to seize on the misdeeds of a few in order to gut the vital programs that provide access to federal health care and special health education services, keep American children fed, and keep American parents to work with the knowledge that their children are safe. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Jordan from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hudson, who is Salim Saeed and Amy Bach?
I recognize those names as defendants in the Feeding Our Future trial.
They ran Feeding Our Future, is that right?
That's correct.
And they've been indicted?
That's correct.
They've been convicted?
That's correct.
And they're in jail waiting sentences, is that right?
As I understand it.
Okay, I want to go back, because earlier with Mr. Gill, you said that they overlooked the fraud. I think it's worse than that. I think they helped it along. I'm going to go to this meeting that took place, or actually I want to go to March 30th, 2021. Is it true back in March of 2021, the Minnesota Department of Education suspended payments to Feeding Our Future, that program? Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
And then a month later, they resumed payments.
That's correct.
What caused them to change their mind?
What caused them to change their mind? I believe that's correct. A month later, they resumed payments. That's correct. And then a month later, they resumed payments. That's correct. 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 What caused them to change their mind? In my opinion, what caused them to change their mind was pushback from their constituency within the Somali community who accused the state agencies of being racist.
But what caused them to stop it in the first place? Was it whistleblowers coming forward? Was it like this something's not right here? What happened?
Apologize for the misunderstanding. The reason they stopped the funds in the first place is because they had credible allegations that there was fraud taking place.
From whistleblowers and others.
Correct.
And just they're doing their job looking, this doesn't make sense. We got all these programs, no one's getting fed, and yet money's going out the door like crazy. So they suspended it. And then they started it back up, right? Was there any threat of a lawsuit from the Somali community and folks affiliated with Feeding Our Future?
Mr. Jordan, there was more than a threat. They actually did it.
They did? And what was the alleged claim in that lawsuit?
That they were victims of racial discrimination.
Oh, they played the race card, huh? All this fraud going on, money going out, and they played the race card. Now, when I talked about not just overlooking it, there was a meeting that took place between the Attorney General and affiliates of Feeding Our Future. Is that right?
That is correct.
And what happened at that meeting? Do we know?
Yeah, we do, because we have it on tape. There was an audio recording made at that meeting that was entered into evidence in the Feeding Our Future trial, and it was later revealed through work from Center of the American Experiment, the full recording. And my observations of what took place in that meeting was that Attorney General Keith Ellison was focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was keeping these folks in business. There were no questions that he asked of these folks about how the kids are doing, the operation, how they're getting fed, who's being helped. Instead, the focus was entirely on ensuring that the money continues to flow. And I'll add that he went so far as to say that he was going to fight these people in reference to the state agencies. The state agencies are his client.
Yeah, and when you said money's going to flow, did money flow to Mr. Ellison's campaign a couple weeks later from some of the folks who were in that meeting?
Sure did.
How much, do we know how much that was?
I do not have that number.
So it wasn't just overlooking the fraud. They were actively trying to make sure this program continued, and then they benefited from that politically with contributions to their campaign, all in this same year, all in 2021, when this was all coming to a head. Is that accurate?
That is my understanding.
And this fraud is much bigger than this, because as I look, it's like 6 different federal agencies. Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, Small Business Association, Housing, Urban Development, Department of Labor, Department of Agriculture. In this program and a bunch of others, they were shaking down the entire federal government, it looked like. 6 different federal agencies. I think you pointed out, over the last 15 years?
That's correct.
And not only are the Democrat administration overlooking it, they're helping it along. They're assisting it. They're going after whistleblowers, as your colleague pointed out, and they're benefiting from all this politically with contribution to their campaign, not to mention the voting issue that you referenced earlier as well. Is that all accurate?
I believe so.
Oh, now there's more than 6 agencies involved. There's 6 federal agencies that got shaken down, but there's 2 other agencies involved now, the FBI and the DOJ, right? How many people have been indicted now?
I do not have that number in front of me, but it's significant.
And I don't know how long you all been in the legislature. We appreciate your work, appreciate what you do. But have you ever seen anything like this in your time in the legislature? I've never seen anything like this in an agency. Ms. Robbins, you're the chair.
No, sir, we have never seen anything on this scale. It is unbelievable. As Joe Thompson said, it is breathtaking and cannot be overstated.
Yeah, well, God bless you all. Ms. Rankin, or Ms. Rarick, excuse me, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. So I've been there since 2013, and I have been yelled at by Democrats over and over again throughout our time there to say that there is no fraud, this is just made up.
Yeah, this is the template. You see this all the time. The left will tell a lie. We're feeding kids when they're not, when they're just shaking down the taxpayer. The left will tell a lie. The media will report the lie or not report when the truth comes out. And then when you tell the truth, they call you racist. It's as old as time. We see it all the time. This is so wrong. God bless you all for coming forward and getting the facts to the people of Minnesota, and more importantly, to the people of this great country. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be clear that fraud is unacceptable at any level. However, I did have an opportunity to spend the day with a bunch of my kids in my district at my local Head Start Center in Quincy and the Wahlberg Center. And they actually are able to feed those kids breakfast, lunch, and a snack for $6 a day. And I just want to say, from this committee, this investigative investigative committee, if we're really looking for fraud, if we're truly looking for fraud, in addition to all the cases that Mr. Ballou listed, we don't need to go far. I can even suggest the address, 1600 Pennsylvania Ave. If we're looking for fraud in this country, that's a great place to start. That's a gold mine for looking for fraud. And I'll just give one example. You know, you don't have to go back in time very far to see a great example of the fraud that's been put upon this country. Last month, President Trump put his name on the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. For those of you who are too young to remember, JFK was a war hero from my state. He was an Irish Catholic, first Catholic elected president. Fought a lot of bigotry during his time trying to become president. He actually stood up to the Russians. But he was a war hero, a decorated war hero. He's the only United States president who ever have received the Purple Heart. He also received the Medal of Valor from the Navy and the Marine Corps because during World War II, he was commanding a PT boat, PT 109. His vessel was struck by a destroyer in the South Pacific. And he actually risked his life to save his crew members. And after he was assassinated, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, his successor, and the United States Congress at that time recognized his service and sacrifice to this country by naming the Performing Arts Center after him. He had raised most of the money to build that center, he and Jacqueline Kennedy. And it is shameful. It is a case of stolen valor for this president to put his name above the name of John F. Kennedy. That is a fraud being perpetrated on this country right now. And if we're really interested in rooting out fraud, how about starting right there? I have legislation that will take Trump's name off that building and restore it. You know, Congress acknowledged Kennedy's service and sacrifice to our country. He sacrificed everything for this country. And yet, we have allowed this to happen. And we have allowed that fraud, that valor to be stolen from John F. Kennedy. It's wrong. It is wrong. And while I know Trump has his supporters and his minions, and there is no depth to the shame that they will stoop to, but we as Americans should defend the history, defend the goodness that has been done by previous leaders. It's ironic that Jacqueline Kennedy actually established the White House Historical Society, and she did so in a manner that she said we should honor every president within the White House, regardless of party, but because of the service and the sacrifice that they have made on behalf of our country. That's a much different sentiment that is held at the White House today when you see the shameful plaques that have been put up by this president denigrating previous presidents and their service to this country. So I hope my colleagues will join me in that legislation to restore the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and eliminate this fraud, glaring fraud that's being perpetrated on the American people. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Byron Donalds from the great state of Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we begin, I have a letter to submit for the record titled Collective Request for Congressional Oversight, Systematic Retaliation and Governance Failure at the Minnesota Department of Human Services. Chairman, this letter was written by the whistleblowers and has been provided to the committee. I want to submit that for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Ms. Rarick, first of all, thank you for your service to the state of Minnesota. I want to refer back to your commentary about a meeting where the lieutenant governor of the state of Minnesota, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, came and admonished these whistleblowers. Can you go into more detail about what was said in this meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. So I don't have any more detail other than what I read into the record. Unfortunately, it was obviously a public meeting, and there were hundreds of DHS employees, so Department of Human Services employees there. It was a story that's been reported multiple times on the X page, but I don't have any more details than that, other than the fact that that wasn't the only time that she retaliated.
Do you think that the lieutenant governor was operating outside of the purview of Governor Walz?
So it's interesting, the timing, and it was before he ran as the vice president, and so she was completely almost tied at the hip with Governor Walz at that time in history.
I think it's important for people to understand that in virtually every state in the country, the lieutenant governor is essentially chosen by the governor. And so lieutenant governors typically do not operate outside of the purview of the governor. It's kind of their job to, play QB2, if you will, to the governor. So would it be clear to state that the lieutenant governor's comments trying to railroad whistleblowers, trying to demean whistleblowers and discourage whistleblowers was at the directive of Governor Walz?
You can definitely assume that because, like I said, at that moment in time, up until the point where the governor ran for VP, she was seen at literally every press conference. She was in all the meetings. They were tied at the hip. They were always together. So if she was saying it, he had approved it. I'm certain of it.
Well, I guess you could say she's kind of a knucklehead, too. Moving on, the list of programs in the fraud in Minnesota are rampant. You have the Child Care Assistance Program. You have the Feeding Our Future. You have the Housing Stabilization Services. You have the Early Intensive Development and Behavioral Intervention. You have Integrated Community Supports. Ms. Robbins, you're the chair of the investigative committee. The depth of fraud that you have seen, were there controls in place in the state of Minnesota that could have prevented this fraud? And were these controls ignored by the Walz administration and by the Department of Human Services?
Absolutely. So we have many whistleblower reports talking about how DHS undermined ability to strengthen internal controls. So, for example, there was an effort for the Child Care Assistance Program. They have a clear and convincing evidence standard to disqualify someone from being a provider, where all the other programs are a lower standard, preponderance of the evidence. There was an effort to make this a lower standard so it was easier to disqualify people to preponderance. And the Minnesota Minority Child Care Association, which was run by a group of Somali providers, opposed it, and DHS went along with their recommendation. And in a similar vein, we were trying to reduce the number of child care employees with children that could work in these child care centers, because that was one of the vectors of fraud, right. And they opposed that.
So you had the Somali community who on purpose was petitioning the state of Minnesota to lower the standards to be able to make sure that fraud cannot be caught. Is that correct?
Well, they wanted to keep the standard clear and convincing, which makes it harder to disqualify people.
So it makes it harder for them to be disqualified from wasting taxpayer funds. Is that
Absolutely.
correct? Okay. Ms. Robbins, I want to stay with you. I want to talk about use of funds. You've talked about some of these funds were used to buy property in Kenya.
Yes, sir.
Property in Turkey. Do I have that correct?
Yes.
Remittances back to Somalia.
Yes.
I think it's important for the committee to understand that these remittances, in part, are used in what's called the Hawala. I want to make sure I have the terminology right. The Hawala network. Ms. Robbins, can you speak to what the Hawala network is? Yes.
So it's an informal network where someone goes to a Hawala place in Minneapolis, which is like a money exchange or a money sending site, and they say, I want to send X amount of dollars. And then there's a receiving site in Somalia, and they put take the cash out. So money doesn't cross the border. It's an order for money here that gets transmitted to Somalia.
For the time, because I'm out of time, I want to expound. In Somalia and other parts in the Middle East region writ large, A Hawala network is a bunch of money exchangers, hand to hand, not bank account to bank account.
Exactly.
And what is clear in Somalia and other parts is that Al-Shabaab, the largest Al-Qaeda affiliate in Somalia, they have their hands all through this network. So taxpayer money, United States dollars, that are being remitted into Somalia, in part, have been utilized or have fell into the hands of Al-Shabaab. Do you think that's a correct assessment?
Yes, we have plenty of evidence of that, from money directly going to Al-Shabaab, but then also indirectly because they take a cut of whatever gets sent to Somalia.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I know I'm over. Thank you for the additional time.
Mr. Chair, I seek recognition for unanimous consent request.
Chair recognizes Ms. Presley.
I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a December 2025 article from the Minnesota Star Tribune titled, "Contrary to Trump's Claims, Somalis Add $8 billion to Minnesota's economy."
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Ro Khanna from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, fraud, waste, and abuse is not a partisan issue. FDR in 1932 with the New Deal railed against inefficiencies and fraud and waste in state and local government. I want to be clear. Many in the Democratic Party stand against the misappropriation or misuse of taxpayer dollars. The reality is, as a progressive Democrat, I believe the ultra-wealthy should pay more. But I want that money going for the health care, the child care, and the education of the American people. It offends me if there is waste or fraud in any of our states. That's why I called for people in my state of California to share stories of inefficiencies, fraud, or wasteful spending. I partnered with the All In podcast to advertise that we need to be responsible stewards of our tax dollars. And I believe we should be doing this for all 50 states. I challenge my colleagues on the Republican side. Let's have an audit of all 50 states to make sure that government money is being spent wisely. We don't need to make these partisan hearings. Every American has a stake in making sure that they have a receipt for where their tax dollars are going. Every American has a stake, if we're going to ask them to pay tax, to make sure that that money isn't being wasted. And I'd like to see this committee work together to stand up for basic fairness of the American taxpayers. I certainly am going to do that in the state of California, and we should be doing that in all 50 states. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Khanna. And I believe you're sincere, and we want to work with you on fraud in any state. If it's a Republican state, Democratic state, we don't care. The mission of this committee is to root out waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement, and we would gladly work with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
I have a UC request.
Proceed.
Thank you. First one is Arizona has recovered just 5% of taxpayer dollars lost in a $2.5 billion Medicaid fraud scheme.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I'll save the rest for the future. No, I've got a bunch more, but not right now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Chair recognizes myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Yesterday, Minnesota's Office of the Legislative Auditor published an audit of the state's Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Administration grants. I'd like to enter that report and its cover letter into the record. Without objection, so ordered. The cover letter of this report states, quote, "However, during the course of our audit, we identified a number of documents that the Behavioral Health Administration either backdated or created after our audit happened," end quote. It sounds like Governor Tim Walz's Department of Human Services may have been fabricating evidence by creating documentation after the fact to mislead voters, to mislead auditors. This new report noted that one grantee who received nearly $680,000 from this agency for 1 month's work, but could not provide any documentation or proof that any work was actually completed. What's more, and this is the kicker, the report notes that the grant manager who approved this money left the agency within days of approving the grant to take a job with the very same grantee that they approved money for. So very quickly, Representative Roberts Have you ever seen anything like this in your time as a member of the Minnesota's Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Policy Committee?
We have heard whistleblower reports of backdating and falsification before, and we also have a record of earlier in the CCAP, the child care fraud, where they would allow the providers to submit records far after the investigation and accept them as true. So clearly this has been a pattern at the agency, and it's unacceptable.
Unbelievable. And we want to work with you. We want to work with these whistleblowers. We're serious about this. The Trump administration's on the ground. We want to catch these people, and we want to put them behind bars, and we want to hold any politician that participated in these schemes accountable. Representative Hudson, who's to blame for this dysfunction?
Well, the blame can go around quite a bit, but as Tim Walz himself said, the buck stops with him.
Representative Robbins, do you have any examples of how the Walz administration blocked investigators from moving forward with high-priority fraud investigations?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman. I have met with whistleblowers and gotten documents from them about how after the original CCAP whistleblower report came out in March and April of 2019, subsequent to that, there was an Office of Inspector General within DHS that had investigative authority to do surveillance, warrants, and seize electronics, and they were shut down. They were told they could no longer do criminal investigations. They were told they could no longer meet with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents that were assigned to them without supervisors' approval. And instead, when they found one of the other members talked about how they changed the language. They went from calling it fraud to calling it overbilling. And they created an overbilling committee to all the investigative agents now couldn't do criminal investigations, and they had to flag issues of overbilling, and then a committee would decide if any of that overbilling would be recouped.
Committee appointed by Walz?
No, appointed within DHS.
Oh, appointed by the own bureaucracy.
Yes. So they shut down criminal investigations. They created a committee to call it overbilling and decide if overbilling investigations would even try to recoup the money.
This is evidence that Tim Walz interfered with investigators who knew there was fraud. The rumors of fraud have been taking place. I've been hearing them for a decade, and yet he interfered to try to obstruct their investigation of fraud.
Yes, his agencies shut down criminal investigations.
Representative Hudson, we didn't get $9 billion stolen overnight. How did the fraud in Minnesota become so widespread?
Well, listen, let me give the maximum benefit of the doubt that these programs were designed for a beneficial legislative intent.
Of course.
The way that it happened was by when people recognized that the system wasn't working and they raised those concerns were ignored, and a culture suppressing raising those concerns was fostered by the Walz administration.
So obviously there was a lack of oversight by the Walz administration. Why would Governor Walz let $9 billion in fraud occur? Mr. Hudson.
In my opinion, because it was politically beneficial to Democrats. Again, the Somali community is a huge constituency group, and we've had some tight races in Minnesota, and it makes a difference for them.
Because it's a huge part of the Democrat voting base in Minnesota. Is that correct?
Correct.
Representative Varick, Governor Walz's announcement not to seek a third term seems to be an admission of guilt, I think, to most Americans, and an attempt by the Democrat establishment to cover up his role in the rampant fraud. He claims this is so he can focus on defending the people of Minnesota against criminals who prey on our generosity. As someone who has been in the Minnesota legislature longer than Tim Walz has been governor, can Governor Walz actually be trusted to defend Minnesotans when he allowed fraud to fester for his entire tenure as governor?
Mr. Chairman, if Governor Walz was serious about stopping fraud, he would have done it in 2019 when he took office. He has done nothing other than appoint commissioners that suppressed fraud and retaliated against their own employees.
And just think, this man was almost elected Vice President of the United States. This was the pick for the sitting Vice President of the United States to be the next Vice President of the United States. This is unbelievable. If people aren't held accountable, if people don't go to jail for this, this will continue, not just in Minnesota, but other states. And we're going to do everything we can on this committee to work with you all and every whistleblower in Minnesota and any other of the 49 states who wants to come forward to expose waste, fraud, and abuse. We're going to work with you and eliminate it and hold people accountable. Chair now recognizes Mr. Mfume. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a UC request.
Okay, go ahead.
First one is from the American Immigration Council. Immigrants contribute billions to federal and state taxes each year, as well as immigrants do not commit more crimes in the U.S. despite fear-mongering.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Mfume from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you and the ranking member for bringing us together on this today. I have a request for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from James Clark, the Inspector General of the Minnesota Department of Human Services, directed to the Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee of the House of Representatives in Minnesota, requesting information on the alleged 700 tips that have been received. I'd like to enter that with unanimous consent, Mr.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chair, I know we're up against the clock. Many of us are trying to get to the special briefings on the action that has taken place in Venezuela, and so we are leaving one by one. I do want to try to get a couple of things in before I have to depart also. I want to thank you again. As ranking member of this committee's subcommittee on government operations, it has been my focus to combat waste, fraud, and abuse within the federal government for the last 3.5 years. Regardless of what side you're on, what side of the aisle, or what you believe, as has been stated, everybody should be against fraud. It requires our collective attention to address the issue and to minimize the consequences that we are seeing that are taking place. Not minimize the consequences to the perpetrators, but minimize the hurt to taxpayers in this country. As ranking member of that committee, we have committed ourselves to fight this full and necessary issue over and over again. And I believe that from most of the people I've heard, we all are concurrence that stealing from taxpayers is the wrong thing, period. Now, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, and I, who is the chairman of that subcommittee, have been working together on a bipartisan basis to create a congressional scorecard to assess the progress of key government spending programs in reducing fraud and improper payments, both through the federal government and through states. Additionally, through the American Rescue Act plan, Congress has provided funding for PRAC, as well as the Pandemic Analytics Center of Excellence to deter, detect, and prevent fraud across multiple state agencies and multiple federal agencies. I've also co-led several bills here in the House that address that type of fraud. Congress should defend these programs that seek to find a way to root out this problem, and we need to do that in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way. The Council of Inspector Generals for Integrity and Efficiency, in their report a year and a half ago to the Congress and to the President, found that every dollar spent on the Office of Inspectors General, as a result, $26 was saved for every one that was spent. Now, that's a return on investment that taxpayers deserve, and unfortunately, the Trump administration illegally defunded CIGIE last year, and I've joined with my colleagues, several of whom on this committee, in leading several letters to oppose that unlawful set of firings of inspector generals. I urge this administration again and my colleagues to restore the congressionally designated funding to CIGIE and the offices of inspectors general so that we might be able to continue the work necessary to combat waste, fraud, and abuse. Before I yield, I want to thank Mr. O'Connor for his comments that this issue should be nonpartisan, that when we make it something other than that, we take away from our ability to bring about change, and we, in some sort of way, chip away at the sort of belief that the public has that we are really serious about doing something here. So it was concerning to me also to have heard some of the xenophobia that began earlier in this hearing, Mr. Chairman. Differences versus similarities. And when we do that, we create the problems that we always are trying to do away with. Asking witnesses to give their opinion of Somalis as a general group of Americans. Asking witnesses their opinion. Do you think they vote for Democrats? Do you think they just give money to Democrats, asking their opinion. What is your opinion of Somalians? We might as well say, what is your opinion of Jews? What is your opinion of black people? What is your opinion of Latinos? That sort of thing, although it may sound good and play to the issue, creates a slippery slope. I want to caution people, a slippery slope. We heard earlier that of over 100,000 Somalis in this country, 87 were indicted in Minnesota. That comes out to 0.087%. Those sort of things create, I think, the disbelief that a lot of people have that we're about doing the business that we ought to do. And it gets back to the point that the gentleman from California raised, that we've got to find a way to keep this from being partisan and to keep it from being subjective. I would yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlemen, you respect. Chair recognize Mr. Biggs before I go to Mr. Crane. Mr. Biggs, you have a UC?
Yes, sir. First one is Tim Waltz claims he fired people amid fraud scandals but won't name names. Next one, Waltz appointees failed to stop rampant Minnesota fraud. Next one, exclusive DHS insider claims systemic issues in addressing fraud. Next one, here's what the Trump administration is doing to crush Minnesota's fraud epidemic. Next one, Minnesota Fraud Committee Chair claims Waltz turned a blind eye to fraud warnings for years, and I'll yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Grateful to have elected officials from Minnesota here today who can provide more intimate information regarding this mind-blowing fraud coming from the Somali community in Minnesota. According to Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, there is an estimated $9 billion or more in fraud. Many obviously believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I want to thank and acknowledge the independent reporters Nick Shirley and Dave Hawk who broke this story wide open. Today I'm introducing a bill to award Nick Shirley with the Congressional Medal for his explosive work in exposing astronomical fraud in Minnesota. And the reason I'm doing this is because the American people are sick and tired of this, and they're sick and tired of mainstream media not covering any of it. The biggest question that most Americans, however, have is this: is this incompetence at the executive level with the governor and attorney general? Are they involved and complicit? I'm going to start with you, Ms. Robbins.
Thank you, sir. My understanding is that they were certainly aware of the fraud and they did nothing to stop it. And there were plenty of opportunities. And their commissioners and their agencies also undermined efforts to tighten internal controls.
And according to Ms. Rarick, I believe you said that they were actually going after whistleblowers to suppress the expose of this fraud. Is that correct?
That is what the whistleblowers have said repeatedly.
Thank you. One thing that is so alarming is the reporting that many of these fraudulent companies are then donating the stolen money back to the same Democrats that are protecting them and advocate for these very programs. Is that correct, Mr. Hudson?
I would agree with that statement.
Well, we just had one of my Democrat colleagues said these are just opinions. Do you know, are these guys donating money back to Democrats?
Yes, they are.
I'd like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, an article from Breitbart News saying, with the title being Database Searches Show Somali Fraudsters Funding Democrat Politicians. So these aren't opinions.
Without objection.
There's actually reporting on this. Are you guys aware? You guys are elected officials in Minnesota, right? Are you guys aware of the reporting that some of the stolen money is getting funneled back to the Islamic terror group Al-Shabaab in Somalia? Mr. Robbins?
Yes, sir. And we have evidence of it going back as far as 2012, where a man was convicted of sending $21,000 to Al-Shabaab. In 2011, 2 Minnesota women were convicted of sending money to different groups. Someone else, we have multiple references of how the Al-Shabaab takes a cut when the money gets to Somalia through the Hawala network. So I think there's ample evidence on this and federal convictions.
Yeah, that's outrageous. Obviously, one of the biggest reasons so many Americans are outraged by this massive exposure is because we generously and often foolishly allow immigrants and people into our country, and then they rob the American people blind while our debt skyrockets and the American people struggle to make ends meet. Are you guys hearing from your constituents the same outrage that I'm hearing from mine about this issue?
Minnesotans are fed up. Everywhere I go in the state, Minnesotans are so frustrated. As I said in my opening remarks, we are a highly taxed state, and they are angry that this much of their money, $9 billion, is being absconded by criminals.
Mr. Hudson, are you just hearing from Republicans on this, or are Democrat constituents like, oh my God, I'm struggling to put my kids in school, struggling to make ends meet, and my tax dollars are being robbed by people, and then they're sending it all over the place, and this is complete fraud. What is going on, and why hasn't anything been done about it?
I'll give you a personal example. So my family, my in-laws in particular, are politically diverse. A lot of them vote for Democrats, and they're fairly apolitical. They're not like me, all plugged in. And so I kind of use them as a bellwether for what the people are thinking. Across the board, everybody is upset about this fraud.
And I'm guessing when you guys bring this up, whether it's to the Walz administration, whether it's to the AG, the number one thing that comes back at you is you're a racist, you're a white supremacist, or you're an Islamophobe. As we've seen Governor Walz now trying to answer for these questions, he's doing it at the national level. Do you guys hear the same thing at the state level as well?
Yes, absolutely. They always pivot to the divisive. As I stated in my opening statement, it's diversion, right? We're going to talk about personalities. We're going to talk about partisan politics. We're going to find some way to get people yelling at each other rather than looking at the problem.
Or, like you've heard my colleagues do on this panel, it's Donald Trump, baby.
Yep.
It's all about Donald Trump, right? The old pivot. We're not going to talk about what's going on in Somalia and not going to talk about what's going on in Minnesota with this massive fraud scandal. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. With my remaining seconds, can we play the video I have, Mr. Chairman? Or did we run out of time?
We did run out of time, but can we put that in the record with that? Can we?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Crane yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Stansberry from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Happy New Year. Welcome to our guests. Thank you to our legislators for being here today and to our guests. You know, I come to these committee hearings. I'm ready to debate the topics. I'm grateful that you're bringing this case to our attention. Yes, we need to prosecute these crimes, period. Let's do that. And I'm also grateful to see that this committee is actually conducting a hearing that is in its jurisdiction, which is oversight over government fraud. But I do have to say, to my colleague's point that was just made, that I am surprised to see the focus, given that the President of the United States and the administration are engaged in fraudulent behavior literally daily, including just a few days ago, invading a foreign country, using the United States military to take their oil, and notifying oil and gas companies before the United States Congress, and the president claiming last night that he is personally going to control the oil and give government kickbacks to oil and gas companies. So why are we not investigating that? It definitely gives you the impression that there's a double standard in this country. I also want to say that I'm troubled to see that this hearing is being held in conjunction with an announcement that the administration made just yesterday that they were going to freeze $10 billion in federal funding for childcare and family assistance to 5 states across the country. And if you watched the president's crazy address yesterday, you heard him say it himself. But I want to say one thing, because my colleagues have pointed out all about weaponizing the government for political purposes. Well, these 5 states happen to have one thing in common. They all have Democratic governors and gubernatorial elections this year. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so, my friends. And this, of course, comes after weeks of viral videos from a young man YouTuber who was literally creeping around daycares by himself, making claims about fraud that were not there. And then the vice president and the FBI director were retweeting these videos without even verifying if they were true, unleashing a furor of anti-immigrant and anti-Somali hate across the country, wherein thousands of Somali people got targeted and harassed, including by the President of the United States, who literally used his platform as the President of the United States to call an entire community garbage. He literally said that. So we're not accusing people of being xenophobic and racist. They are being xenophobic and racist, including the President of the United States. And I want to say, for one, that I stand with the Somali and the immigrant community standing here today. But there's a bigger policy point here, which is that this is being used as a politically expedient moment to take away the immigration status of Somalis in the United States as part of the mass deportation plan of this administration. And it is also being used by the 2025ers in this administration to freeze critical programs that we know low-income families depend on, and which they call part of the woke agenda. This is part of a larger effort to defund these programs, as we are seeing across these 5 states. So I think it's important to pull back the curtain a little bit about what is actually going on in this hearing and its coordination with the administration, that this is about, 1, demonizing political opponents in Democratic states during a major election cycle. 2, it's about demonizing the immigrant community to support cruel and illegal mass deportation policies. And 3, it's about demonizing poor people and struggling families to justify taking away the basic programs that are helping them survive in this country. So I want to just close out by saying that I grew up in a low-income family. Many of you have heard my story before. But as I woke up to the news that the president was freezing child care funding to these 5 states, I had to think about the millions of families that would be impacted by it. I think about my own mom, a single mom, just barely struggling to get by, working multiple jobs. These programs are a lifeline. They make it possible for people like me to ultimately have a pathway to success. And you all are sitting here running legislation on shower heads while millions of Americans' health insurance is expiring, while millions of Americans can't even put food on the table right now. And you're over here parading around state officials, demonizing immigrants, talking about cutting basic programs, and you're passing legislation to redefine shower heads in Congress while the President of the United States is illegally invading foreign countries.
Order. Gentlelady's time's expired.
I find it appalling.
Order. Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina. Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have UC requests. First one, HHS freezes child care payments to Minnesota after massive fraud alleged. Next one. Minnesota's Quality Leering Center fixes sign at address still misspelled. Minnesota made it easier to get into daycare business. Trump's deputies freeze child care payments to Minnesota amid alleged Somali fraud. Jonathan Turley explains why feds can dig deep into Somali scammer special.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Mr. Gill.
Got another UC request, an article from City Journal, quote, the largest funder of al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer.
Without objection, so ordered. And I believe, Mr. Fallon, you have a request?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record an article by the Center of American Experiment, Feeding Our Future, Keith Ellison, caught on tape.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. Representative Robbins, when Governor Walz testified before this committee last June, I reminded him that the fraud involving the nonprofit Feeding Our Future established Minnesota as ground zero for the largest COVID-19 fraud scheme in the nation. Feeding Our Future took $250 million in federal funds out of the mouths of hungry children, which amounts to $1,600 per child living in poverty in Minnesota. According to the FBI, the $250 million in federal taxpayer money was funneled, quote, into luxury homes, cars, and lavish lifestyles while families struggled, end quote. The FBI stated it, quote, will not allow criminals to rob federal programs and walk away unscathed. We'll expose their schemes, dismantle their networks, and ensure they face the full weight of justice, end quote. Last June, Governor Walz assured me that he, quote, wholeheartedly, end quote, supported the federal government's efforts to bring to justice those who stole federal taxpayer money at the expense of hungry children. If he had been true to his word, we would not be sitting here today. However, the committee's back today because the Feeding Our Future scam is just the tip of the iceberg of fraud in Minnesota and perhaps beyond. Representative Robbins, Democrats in your state have tried to dismiss your inquiry into the Feeding Our Future fraud as a partisan political exercise. Is exposing fraud and theft of taxpayer funds a partisan activity?
No, ma'am. As I said in our first committee hearing, it is nonpartisan. Everyone should want to protect taxpayers and vulnerable citizens.
And we completely agree. Representative Robbins, did Governor Walz work with you and your committee wholeheartedly to bring justice to those involved in the Feeding Our Future fraud?
No, ma'am. They have ignored the documents we have provided to them. We did a hearing in February of 2025 on child care fraud that was outlined in the Nick Shirley video, and we gave them a list of 72 child care providers that we were concerned about that got $1 million each or more. And as we saw in the Shirley video last month, they have done nothing about it.
Representative Hudson, for several years we've heard about whistleblowers, highlighted by some of us in Congress who noted instances of fraud in Minnesota. With this in mind, the recent allegations from Nick Shirley regarding staggering amounts of fraud involving child care centers come as no surprise. What kind of climate did Governor Walz create for whistleblowers?
Well, I think he did a really good job of demonstrating for us the kind of climate that he's created yesterday when in an unhinged rant, he tried to throw Deputy U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson under the bus, a guy who's been doing this for, I believe, 16 years. If he's willing to throw a Deputy U.S. Attorney under the bus, what do you think he's going to do to a state agency employee? That's the climate, and everybody who works for the Walz administration knows it.
Thank you. Representative Rarick, do you believe the Walz administration seriously pursued whistleblowers' reports of fraud?
I think that the Walz administration seriously retaliated against whistleblowers and ignored them and dismissed them. And, in my opening statement, I talked about the threats of firing them and blacklisting them and things like that. So that's what the Walz administration focused on.
Representative Rarick, innocent American taxpayers are collateral damage in the Democrats' reckless disregard for taxpayer funds. Hard-working Americans and their communities are left to pay the price. What lessons can other states and federal officials take from your work to expose the stunning amount of fraud and the network of those who enabled it that you all have exposed in Minnesota?
Yeah, the answer to that is very simple, and that is if you just do simple, basic good governance like reconciliation and a few other financial controls, you won't have the problems that you have here. And if you don't retaliate against your employees, your frontline workers that point out fraud, you won't have this problem either.
Representative Hudson, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, absolutely. You have to have a culture of good faith, and that is what is lacking in Minnesota. There is not a culture of good faith. And you see a very strange strategy going on right now with Minnesota Democrats, where every day they're denying this problem, which really strikes me as bizarre because we know there are more prosecutions coming. So what are they going to say as story after story drops, and we can cite time and date where they said it wasn't a problem?
Thank you. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to note that it was the Education and Workforce Committee, when I was chair, that first brought this issue to the public's attention, and we got nowhere under a Democrat administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Exactly correct. Thank you, Dr. Fox. Chair recognizes Ms. Summer Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, like so many people on this committee have already articulated, nobody here believes that rooting out fraud and waste and abuse is not a top priority of this committee, of our caucus, of their conference. It is. If you're on this committee, it is the top charge that we all undertake incredibly seriously. But I think, like so many things with the modern Republican Party, it's like you're skulking right around the edge of things, but too often, your bigotry, the Republican Party's own bigotry, is imprisoning them and keeping them from ever actually doing something that helps, not harms, the American people. And this is another one of those instances, right? When it's a person of color, if it's 2 or 3, it's a pattern, and the entire community must be indicted. But if it's 100 Republicans, it's just not bad. Neither here nor there, because it's important. That's why we have routinely held hearings where we actually go over with the Government Accountability Office their high-risk list. We take it seriously. But the tone of this hearing seems to be a hypocritical witch hunt. It's hard to take it as anything but that, rather than an actual oversight effort. Our federal government currently has the tools to catch and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. It's how the alleged fraud in Minnesota was caught by the Biden administration in the first place. Mr. Blue, as a former federal prosecutor, you're familiar with some of the tools that we have, correct?
Yes.
Just briefly, could you please verify the following tools for me? Yes or no? Does the Government Accountability Office work to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yes.
Do inspectors generals work towards these goals?
Absolutely.
What about the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency?
Yes.
Are whistleblowers important to rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Absolutely.
Has the Trump administration helped or hurt these tools?
Certainly hurt it by disbanding the Council for Inspectors General and then ultimately firing 19 IGs.
Thank you. That's right. Again and again, Trump has attacked the oversight mechanisms within the federal government. He illegally fired 17 inspectors general and other key personnel. He goes after whistleblowers and he tries to roll back their protections. He routinely ignores the rampant corruption within his own administration. Republicans have turned a blind eye to all of this. They have held no hearings on these actions. And this hearing today isn't even about fraud generally within the federal benefits system, which we would welcome. Republicans have cherry-picked a blue state and an immigrant population, vulnerable, to demonize. To be clear, Minnesota is not the only state with a fraud problem. To truly tackle waste, fraud, and abuse, we need to approach the issue with a scalpel, not a mallet. Discovering that people are committing fraud in the federal program does not mean we should smash the whole thing and end it. It means its oversight mechanisms need to be improved. That's why it's so disappointing to see that the Minnesota House Fraud Prevention Committee that our witness, the Honorable Kristen Robbins, chairs, has issued no reports on these uncovered schemes. It hasn't advanced any legislation to address the issue or even shared whistleblower reports with their Democratic colleagues. They've just held a bunch of hearings and generated headlines, something our committee is all too familiar with. This hearing is not an effort by Republicans to improve social service programs. It's an excuse to end them and to punish Democratic-led states. This has always been the plan. It's why Republicans' so-called big, beautiful bill is estimated to cut more than $1 trillion from Medicaid and CHIP benefits and cut SNAP for 40 million people, the very children or folks with disabilities who were mentioned in the opening statements. Trump has also already taken advantage of the situation in Minnesota. After a YouTuber harassed and posted unsubstantiated claims of fraud against child care centers, HHS froze child care funding to Minnesota, which would affect more than 23,000 children. Just yesterday, Trump also froze approximately $10 billion in funding for programs supporting child care, social services, grants, and cash assistance in not only Minnesota, but in other Democratic-led states of California, Colorado, New York, and Illinois. No matter what party we're elected to, we represent the people of our district, Democrat or Republican. We represent as the federal government all people of all states, irrespective of how they voted. That's the charge that I took, and I would like and hope that you all would do the same. When so many of these social service programs are being gutted and defunded, fraud becomes even more harmful, as that means even less money is going to people who need it. People need these programs. This situation should be an opportunity to take a deep look at the programs and improve their oversight abilities, not an excuse to cut them entirely. If we care about the most vulnerable, if we care about the most marginalized, this is an opportunity to do so, and I welcome us to actually do that one day. Thanks, I yield back.
Ms. Lee, the IGs are hired to identify fraud. They haven't identified fraud. The IGs have failed. But anyway.
You all have failed.
No,
you all continue to fail. We've done nothing. You've had the gavel, Mr. Comer. We barely do hearings on anything that actually affects change. You have power here, and yet you don't do anything. Yes, he actually initiated this, sir, but thank you so much for your opinion.
You have failed.
I yield it back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman. And I'd just like to point out to everybody that at this very moment, we're going to consider an appropriations bill that had an earmark in it for $1 million for another Somali-led organization whose family has ties and convictions to ISIS and fentanyl-related addiction. And I think it's very difficult to just, for all of us to determine what's legitimate and what's not. But I would just ask if the committee will play the video that Mr. Crane had referred to for me at this time.
Can you stop the... Okay, go ahead.
We get the sound turned up. You can see the subtitles there. If you'll notice the campaign contribution at the bottom for $4,700, and then the $250 million fraud scheme associated with said individuals. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, it's not me calling out one community or another, one individual, representative or another. It's fraud. Representative Robbins, Hudson, and Rarick, thanks for your service. I know it's difficult, and you're operating in difficult circumstances where it doesn't sound like you got a lot of support. And I imagine that as Ms. Robbins, Representative Robbins, you're the chair of the Oversight Policy Committee. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I imagine at the state level you don't quite have the resources you need to track down all this stuff. This federal jury found that Feeding Our Future mastermind and co-defendant, and also the contributor to one of your representatives from your state, one of our colleagues here, $4,700 for a $250 million pandemic fraud scheme. Like, you don't probably have the resources to find that kind of stuff. It's massive, right? And I suspect, as someone who, you know, you serve at the pleasure of your constituents who want to see you elected and contribute to you, a $4,700 campaign contribution for a $250 million of I guess, spending at the federal level is a pretty good investment for people. We're not here to pick on anybody, but I will tell you, I think the American people are particularly affronted when their goodwill is returned by stealing their hard-earned money. I just want to, if you can comment on that particular case, this Feeding Our Future, and the fact that these folks pled guilty to $250 million and then connections to the political operation in your state, which is dismantling your state.
Thank you, sir. Yes, so this is the big problem. There's a network of people who have been politically supporting the Democrats, who have also been contributing to them, and who have been involved in multiple schemes. So a woman who is in this child care group, the Minnesota Minority Child Care Association, Ikram Muhammad, she was later indicted in the Feeding Our Future scandal, as was her brother and her mother, and I believe a sister. And so it's a network that functions in our state that we have to get a handle on. And then one of the people indicted in that case for Feeding Our Future for money laundering $1.1 million Then they used that same company, shell company they did the money laundering with, to buy property for an assisted living facility after they were indicted. And then his wife has a company getting millions of dollars from the state to provide services to the assisted living facility bought by his shell company he's already been indicted for. They do not shut off the spigot.
So
that's the problem.
This is completely outrageous, obviously. I'm not an attorney. Are any one of you three attorneys? Are you? So,
yes, sir.
You said, Representative Robbins, that you informed the governor of these things. That's what you said, right? That's your testimony here today.
Yes, sir. I did a hearing on it, and I brought charts and laid out the roadmap.
So there are crimes of commission and crimes of omission. So if the governor didn't actively be involved in this fraud, that would be a crime of commission. But if he knew about it and didn't do anything about it, would you consider that a crime of omission?
Yes, sir.
And what should be done about crimes of omission regarding taxpayer funds?
So they should be prosecuted. And as you said, we don't have a lot of resources on our committee. As legislators, we don't have access to bank records, health records, the state payment system. So when we get credible allegations of fraud, we bring it to the U.S. Attorney and the Office of Legislative Auditor, because they can get access to those records and then bring the prosecutions criminally.
Thank you, Chair. I yield.
Mr. Chairman.
Before I go to Ms. Randall, Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs for UC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, Washington Post calls for welfare reform after Minnesota fraud scandal. Exclusive. Treasury and House panel launch probes into Tim Walz's handling of $1 billion of food aid fraud. Additionally, referring to the earmark that Mr. Perry just referred to. Additionally, the Somali fraud scandal gave Trump a kill switch. What happens if he doesn't use it? Resurfaced video shows how Somali scammers use daycare centers to scam the state. Scrutinizing SNAP will help ensure the neediest get food stamps. Masterclass. A.G. Hamilton School's WAPO hack playing race card to defend Somali fraud ring in Minnesota. Tim Walz was brought down by a scandal hiding in plain sight. Unearthed surveillance video shows parents allegedly helping with fraud. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back without objection, so ordered. Gentleman yields back. Ms. Randall, a couple of our witnesses have requested bathroom breaks. I told them, the ranking member and I agreed, they can go and come back. We're going to keep the hearing going. If your questions were pertaining to one of them, we'll skip to someone else. If that, do you want to go ahead? All right, Chair recognizes you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have prepared some remarks that I definitely want to get to about the importance of child care funding for all of us in all of our districts. I think we all recognize that we are in a child care crisis. We have lost so many parents, especially women, from the workforce because they just cannot find adequate child care. But I have to start by addressing some of what we have heard in this committee so far today. I didn't get myself together to ask any of my colleagues to yield to for a question, so I'll ask you, and if you don't know the answer, it's okay, I do. What % of sexual assaults in the United States are committed by white men?
I do not know.
57%. Of the January 6th insurrectionists who were pardoned, do you know how many have been charged and convicted and arrested of additional crimes, including child sexual assault, kidnapping, production of child pornography, rape, conspiracy to murder an FBI agent, domestic violence by strangulation?
I do not have that information.
No, 33 since their pardons. Of the 21,504 murder offenders in the United States in 2023, do you know how many were white?
No.
8,842, which is 41%. Following the domestic extremist tracker that GW compiles, since 2015, there have been 643 individuals charged, 447% found guilty. Do you know how many are men?
You tell me.
95%. We can trot out all of the data that we want to create the sense that there is a bad guy. There is a bad group of people. There are folks who are not among us. There are folks who are other. And I think we should spend a lot more time looking at ourselves, looking at American citizens, looking at white men who are committing violence at disproportionate rates in our country, who are committing crimes at disproportionate rates in our country, including the President of the United States, who is sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as so many of my colleagues have pointed out. I also want to say, I've heard a lot about the Somali donors to political campaigns. We all acknowledge, right, that you cannot donate to a political campaign in the United States unless you are an American citizen, right? I'm just going to acknowledge that. You know who else is getting rich as a campaign donor? The expense of the U.S. taxpayers and because of the decisions that this government has made. Yes, Elon Musk, but also billionaire Paul Singer, a Trump donor who is getting rich off the military actions that this president engaged in Venezuela. Now about childcare. $7 for every $1 spent on childcare and early learning are returned to our U.S. economy. It's good for families. It's good for kids. It's good for our economic growth. But we are still facing a childcare crisis in this country. Chair Robbins, I understand that you have 3 kids and that they were enrolled in daycare at one point before you became a stay-at-home mom. What would your reaction be to an unknown, potentially armed, angry individual showing up at your home with a camera, demanding to enter while your children were at home?
So we used a neighbor to do our childcare.
What if they showed up at your neighbor's house?
Yes, I don't think they would be coming in. But
Yeah,
honestly,
how would you feel about it if someone who was armed and angry showed up in the house where your children were?
I'm not sure I understand who was armed. What are you asking about?
Thank you. I imagine you'd be scared. I think many families would be scared if that happens to you. I want to share a story of a provider from Washington State who said, following these fraud claims and the demonization of Somali Americans and child care providers, 3 adults came into her home and banged on her door, startling the children in her care. The children were frightened and confused. She's been receiving repeated death threats by phone and voicemail. Individuals have returned multiple times, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, parking outside the home and monitoring activity. They recorded families arriving and leaving. As a result, families felt unsafe and some withdrew their children from care. A nearby provider closed their program entirely due to fear. Another provider shared that she was approached by a man with a gun outside her home who interrogated her about her child care program, and she is now too scared to step outside. Providers aren't answering the phone anymore because of all the threats, which means that parents aren't able to get in touch with staff regarding their children's care.
Mr. Chairman, order.
Gentlelady's time's expired. You went 30 seconds over.
Thank you. Thank you for your lenience, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gosar from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for traveling. Now, Ms. Robbins, the Minnesota legislature, led by your committee, sounded the alarm on the fraud for years, but has been ignored by Governor Walz. Did Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, was he aware of this?
Yes, he was aware of the fraud, and he came before our committee, and I feel like he did not do his job prosecuting these cases. Most of the cases have been prosecuted federally by the U.S. Attorney, both under President Biden in Feeding Our Future and currently under President Trump.
So he's, in your state, is the top attorney for the public, right?
Yes. For
the public. That's kind of, I find it very interesting. Well, maybe it has to do with something with campaign contributions. Attorney General Ellison and his son received from members of the leading Feeding Our Future, an organization now under investigation. The same group whose members allegedly tried to bribe jurors, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Nothing to see here. Sounds very familiar. Sounds very Biden crime syndicated-esque. Now, when you were talking about the tools that you could use, Would any NGO that takes federal funding be of value to you, that they would have to disclose all their federal funding or all their funding mechanisms if they took 1 penny from the federal government?
Yes, one of the things we've seen in Minnesota is that some of these nonprofits have had their federal 501c3 status revoked, but the state continues to fund it.
It's interesting you say that because, the IRS actually does this study, actually has those numbers, but when we order it, it's blanked out. It's redacted. All of it's redacted. I wonder if there's some interesting aspects to that, follow the money trail. Now, Representative Hudson, the head of Feeding Our Futures was sentenced in November for his role in the largest COVID fraud scheme in U.S. history, according to the DOJ. This is a predictable result of the massive COVID spending with little or no oversight. In fact, we spent between $4.3 and $7.5 trillion during COVID, and we don't have a single receipt, not one. Okay. Now, this is a predictable outcome from the massive spending. Whether it's expanded COVID tax credits under the so-called Affordable Care Act or the programs like the massive or Minnesota HHS initiative with a no enrollment cap. Unfortunately, there are plenty of similar federal programs right here in Washington, D.C. My question for you is, in your experience, what failures make government funding streams particularly susceptible to fraud?
Well, as I outlined in my opening statement and my written testimony, basically we're spending far more money than we have the operational capacity to monitor. Like they're just, now Deputy U.S. Attorney, he was U.S. Attorney at the time, Joe Thompson, said, we can't prosecute our way out of this. That's another way of saying it. We have to have controls on the front end.
Well, and with the massive amounts like I just talked to you about in COVID, it actually gives the environment for fraud. It just builds on it, right?
Correct.
Well, Ms. Rarick, what concrete actions did the Walz administration take to intimidate whistleblowers into silence?
So I think the first thing he did was he put in place commissioners. Right now we have a deputy commissioner over the Department of Human Services that is known to whistleblowers as being like the queen of retaliation. So when you put somebody in charge that is known to retaliate, that's a problem. I would also note on your previous question about the COVID money, and we discovered in our committee that the auditor, so there was a bid for auditing the COVID money, and the auditor was known to be our Minnesota State Auditor, Blaha. So that's another Democrat within the whole fold of the Democrats in Walz as well.
Would it surprise you that we spent $13 trillion from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump in that span of time? $13 trillion with not a single receipt.
That is absolutely shocking. I used to do accounting, and that's deplorable. That's something that you should be in prison for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the United States has no obligation to tolerate guests who break our laws. And in this case, there seems like there's a whole bunch of them. And unfortunately, they were targeting one general area. And it's sad to me that we are always being screamed at about xenophobia, all this different type of phobias, and racist, and yet the facts still stand. So, Mr. Chairman, I find it very interesting today's hearing, and I applaud you for doing it. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman now, our chair now recognizes the lady from Texas, Ms. Jasmine Crockett.
Mr. Chairman, ma'am,
I'm sorry, Ms. Crockett. Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs.
I apologize for that.
That's right.
There's some more you see. Senator John Kennedy brings Somali fraud to the Senate floor. Viral videos, David says he filed complaint against Walz over fraud allegations. Minnesota adds Medicaid fraud verification amid alleged $9 billion loss. Minnesota's Somali fraudsters paid for rich lifestyles with stolen money. What investigators still haven't asked about Minnesota's fraud, I hope to ask that. Trump deploys 2,000 federal agents to Minnesota. Venezuela's been dealt with. Somali scammers should be next. Beyond parody, Craigslist ad from a daycare center in Minneapolis seeks to hire 20 child actors. Dr. Oz orders full-scale federal audit of Minnesota Medicaid. Did you miss the story about alleged Medicaid fraud from a Somali-run health services provider in Maine? A YouTuber's follow-up video on Minnesota fraud is just as wild. HHS to close Biden-era loophole that lets states pay child care providers without counting attendance. Yield back. Thank
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Ms. Jasmine Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and for every witness that is here, thank you so much for your time and your attention. I just have one quick question. I have not been here the entire hearing, but I don't think this question has been posed for each of you, and we can start at the far end. Do you believe that all Somalis are engaged in fraud?
I do not, and I'd like to...
Okay, just yes or no. Next.
Of course not.
Oh, absolutely not. We have good Somali people in our state.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to make sure I level set because it seems like we want to continue to, especially as we just heard those particular articles entered into the record, we want to continue to just make it seem as if you are Somali, then somehow you are a fraudster. And this administration has decided that it wants a target on their backs. And so when my colleague, Ms. Randall, decided that she wanted to talk about the threats that are being made towards various Somali people, the reason she brought it up is because this particular side of the aisle has a tendency of if one person does something bad, especially if they are an immigrant, then we are going to cast aside that entire community. So I wanted to level set, and I appreciate your honesty because that's something that we very rarely get from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. In fact, if we want to talk about fraud, I got a lot of fraud that we're going to talk about because we're going to get into this, but I am very curious to hear. Let me ask you, Mr. Ballou, are you aware of allegations that $50,000 in taxpayer dollars have been given to someone that is currently sitting in this administration by the name of Tom Homan? Are you aware? Okay, that's a yes.
I am.
Okay. And last I checked, and correct me if I'm wrong if you have different information, but he was given that $50,000 in exchange for being able to provide contracts and kickbacks to people as soon as Trump was going to get into office. The DOJ was actually investigating this, but as soon as Trump got into office, last I checked, he actually said, go ahead and throw away that case.
So it was a Department of Justice investigation, and he accepted the money from an undercover FBI agent in cash.
Are you aware as to whether or not we ever got that $50,000 back?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. Are you aware as to whether or not this committee has decided to investigate that?
I'm not.
Are you aware as to whether or not any committee in Congress has decided to investigate the fact that we know that he took $50,000 from an undercover officer, and yet we still don't have that money, nor does he have any charges?
I'm not.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's get into it. We're living through the most corrupt presidential administration in American history, a $300 million ballroom, a $230 million payout from the Department of Justice because the president got his feelings hurt because he had to be investigated for being a criminal. Hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars spent at Trump-owned properties around the country, Trump-branded wine being sold at the Coast Guard exchanges, American taxpayer dollars being spent on DHS propaganda ads on Truth Social, awarding federal contracts to corporations in exchange for campaign contributions. Kash Patel flew his girlfriend around the country on a multi-million-dollar jet that taxpayers paid for. Kristi Noem gave companies she's affiliated with hundreds of millions of tax dollars, then went out and spent another $200 million on 2 private jets for her travel. For 12 months, this administration has been taking billions of taxpayer dollars from American people and have been giving it away to their own companies in the form of tax cuts, government contracts, or other government funded subsidies. So Congress has a role in getting rid of fraud, I will admit that, in any federally funded government program. However, I think the fraud that the American people are concerned about is that the Republicans are taking away Americans' health care so that ultra billionaires can get more tax cuts. The real fraud is the dehumanization and demonization of the working class Americans and immigrants to distract folks away from corporate socialism that's happening because of the Republicans. So this is truly the definition of throwing away the baby with the bathwater. The Republican philosophy is that if the cost of living for the average American increases, they're on their own. But if the cost of doing business increases for the wealthiest people on earth, well, then it's the government job to bail them out. But I want to get to my last question because, Mr. Ballou, I got to give you a chance. He's been issuing pardons for numerous people who have defrauded the American people. And Republicans on this committee, yeah, just as quiet as the room just got, right? So, Mr. Ballou, Talk to me about how the Trump administration has welcomed fraud across government by purging DOJ attorneys and shuttering ethics office across the federal government.
Well, one of the things that's been a common theme in this discussion so far is potential government employee involvement in some of these schemes. That hasn't been proven yet, but it does seem to be alleged. The concern that I have is the office that would prosecute that in the Department of Justice, the Public Integrity Section, has been largely defunded and decimated.
Thank you so much. And my time has expired, but I do have some UCs, Mr. Chairman.
You want to do them now?
I do.
Okay.
The first one is from Truth Out. Trump grants clemency to executive who led $205 million Medicare fraud scheme.
Without objection, it's ordered.
The next one is Trump commutes sentence of Dr. Solomon Melgen, eye doctor, found guilty of Medicare fraud.
Without objection, it's ordered.
The next one, healthcare fraudster Philip Esfermaze is latest Trump clemency recipient to be arrested. He defrauded more than $1 billion from Medicare.
Without objection, it's ordered.
Trump pardons nursing home owner and supporter convicted of $7 million in tax evasion.
Without objection, it's ordered.
Trump
and
pardons,
we'll want all that stuff to put in the record. So,
I will. I got you. Trump pardons cost victims and taxpayers $1.3 billion, House Judiciary Committee Democrats review says.
All right, without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Chair recognizes
Chairman.
Ms. Mace. Chair recognizes
I have a request to be recognized to make a motion.
I'm sorry?
I have a request to be recognized to make a motion.
Yes, go ahead.
I move that the committee issue a subpoena to the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services for all records related to the immigration and naturalization of or any immigration benefit received by Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Ahmed Abdi Salan Irsi, also known as Ahmed Aden, Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, and any members of Ilhan Omar's family.
Okay, another motion is made. The committee will hold this motion in abeyance until the end of today's hearing. The committee will now proceed with today's hearing. Thank you, Ms. Mace. Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A report that came out yesterday indicates that on average, almost $1 million a day in cash is being sent from Minnesota out of the country by a small group of Somali carriers. Are any of you familiar with that on the panel?
I'm not familiar with that particular story, but that story has been in Minnesota for a long time, where millions of dollars has gone out of MSTP, our airport, in cash to Somalia.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that this be admitted as part of the
Without objection, to ordered.
Thank you. The Biden administration required states to pay health care and daycare providers before verifying any attendance at a daycare and before care was delivered.
That's fine.
Would you say that policy facilitated the funneling of funds or defrauding of government funds? We'll start with, we'll go down the panel. We'll start with Representative Robbins, please.
My understanding is that there weren't ever enough internal controls, but under Medicaid rules, the Walz administration already had the opportunity to stop payment when there were credible allegations of fraud. They had the opportunity to do prepayment review. They could do all of those things, and they did not use those tools.
Not only does paying people before they deliver a service introduce an obvious opportunity for people to abscond with public dollars, but we've heard these arguments in our communities back in Minnesota from Minnesota Democrats that it's just so important that we pay people up front because they can't afford to wait for the reimbursements.
Yeah, Ms. Rarick.
Yeah, this is absolutely counter to good accounting and good accountability. So I would definitely say that you should be providing the service and getting paid after.
Mr. Ballou, what do you think?
I can't speak to that policy only because I'm learning about it just now. But I will say, my primary...
So then the question then is, do you think it's a good idea to pay for the service up front before it's delivered and without accounting?
I can only speak to the criminal side of things, not the administrative side. But my concern here, again, is to the extent that there would be violations because of that change, the office responsible for prosecuting those crimes...
Okay, so that's largely... So you didn't want to answer the question. You want to filibuster. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Now, here where we're going to go is... one of the things that you mentioned, Representative Robbins, is physical facilities and real estate. And as we've seen and looked at this, as I've looked at this, all of the public reporting that's out there, looked at a little bit of Exhibit A, that's like 2,800 pages or 2,300, whatever it is. Didn't get to look at all of it, but looked at some of it. I want to know, did anybody go in and find out who's owning all these properties, because you have basically vacant properties ostensibly holding themselves out to be daycare centers? Who owns those properties? Anybody look into that?
So some of our staff is looking at it currently, and I would encourage people to think about this as you look at your other states. So we have people who own the properties and then other people related to them or close to them that provide the services, and they both get remuneration. And then we have people who homestead assisted living facilities, small single-family homes, and say it's a business, but then they shouldn't be allowed to homestead. We have instances where there are multiple assisted living facilities that have been homesteaded. So the ownership of the properties and the ownership of the business is very important. This has gotten to be such a problem in Minnesota that people invest in the daycare business as an investment. And so getting not only who runs the facility, but who the ownership is critical, because that's where a lot of the money goes.
That's my point, is that you're setting up a series and facilitating straw man purchases of actual real property to actually launder or hide money coming from the state and defraud the state. And I would encourage both the feds and the state to really take a close look at that. I did find it interesting. Well, let me just ask the last question I've got time for here is, well, I got to ask two. The $18 billion, I'm saying $18 billion, that's the total nut over the last 5 years, if I understand your testimony right, Representative Hudson, and half of it was defrauded.
That is the estimate from the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Okay. Has the Waltz administration put into place any new procedures since this has come to a very viral head in the last 6 weeks?
They've appointed a couple of guys and shifted around a couple of chairs on the deck, but it's the equivalent of throwing a glass of water at a stove that's on fire.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a few more UCs, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Victims shocked after Biden grants clemency to Kids for Cash judge and $54 million embezzler. Shocked. Biden clemency for convicted fraudsters met with outrage. It's a slap in the face. Comer on Fox News. Biden crime family pardons serve as a confession of their corruption. Biden pardons more people in his criminal clan and commutes sentence of Leonard Peltier. Op-ed from the former legislative auditor, Jim Nobles, what's the right number? And then finally, Mr. Chairman, 18 U.S. Code 666, theft or bribery concerning programs receiving federal funds seems apt in this case. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Presley from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just begin by making this plain. Credible fraud must be investigated and prevented. Every dollar that is stolen from public programs is a dollar that is taken from a child who needs care, a senior who needs food, or a family that is already struggling to make ends meet. Ms. Robbins, I want to just begin with a basic question, and please answer yes or no. When someone is convicted of defrauding the public, do you believe that they should be held accountable?
Yes.
So if we're serious about fraud, then we also have to be serious about accountability. Ms. Robbins, do you mind just expounding, what does accountability look like to you?
We want to prosecute everyone who's committed a crime, and we want to fire officials in the agencies that are liable for allowing the failure of internal controls.
Okay, so Ms. Robbins, let me be more clear. What should happen to fraudsters who steal public dollars?
They should go to jail.
So in my opinion, accountability means restitution. It means consequences, like incarceration, that help ensure that it doesn't happen again, as a real deterrent and accountability. It means that money taken from families and the public is returned to them. But that is not the standard that is being set by Donald Trump. who is wielding his clemency authority to allow fraudsters to escape accountability altogether. Last month, my office published a clemency report titled Trump's Clemency Gap, How Trump's Pardons Are Ignoring the People Who Need Them the Most. I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record. Thank you. Now to the witnesses who serve in the Minnesota State Legislature on the Fraud Prevention Committee, let's walk through these pardons for fraudsters, and we all care about fraud. So Ms. Robbins, Mr. Hudson, and Ms. Rarick, Donald Trump pardoned George Santos, who defrauded voters and owed them $370,000 in restitution to victims. Raise your hand if you oppose this pardon. Thank you, Mr. Ballou.
Ma'am, I would have to look at the law and the facts of the case. We cannot know the facts of all these individual cases.
Don't deflect. This is a very public case. You know who George Santos is. You know exactly what he did. We just agreed that, fraud is unacceptable. And you just talked about accountability. You said if people commit fraud and exploit the public good, that they should be incarcerated. So this is not a complicated question. So I will give you all one more opportunity. Ms. Robbins, Mr. Hudson, and Ms. Rarick, raise your hand if you oppose the pardon of George Santos.
Not playing this game.
It's not a game. It's real life. It's not a game at all. Okay, but I will take your refusal to go on record, not only as cowardice, but that you do agree with that pardon of that fraudster. Moving on. Donald Trump also gave, and this has never been done before, presidential pardons to corporations that committed fraud. One example is the crypto company BitMEX that violated U.S. law and was fined $100 million. Now raise your hand if you oppose Trump's pardon of this crypto company.
Not participating.
Thank you, Mr. Ballou. Okay, again, I'll take your refusal to raise your hand in opposition. That means that you support this pardon of this corporation that frauded folks to the tune of $100 million.
Refusal to participate is not an expression.
Reclaiming my time.
To participate is not an expression one way or the other.
Do you know the rules of committee? This is my time.
I know that I am here as a member of the public.
Reclaiming my time. You are not, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
That's what I know.
You are not in order with the rules of the committee. This is my time. This is my time.
And it's
I
our
ask the
dollars.
questions and you answer, but you're too much of a coward to answer. So we're going to move on. Now, yesterday was the 5-year anniversary, and I want to note of the January 6th insurrection. And on Donald Trump's first day in office, he pardoned 1,500 insurrectionists, including Brian Christopher Mock, who's from Minnesota. Are y'all going to say you don't know who that is? He's from Minnesota. Now, he kicked, shoved, and threw a flagpole at police officers, law enforcement that you claim to support. And he did all of that in the name of fraud. He was an election denier, so an election fraud lie. Now, he claims he did these things in the name of patriotism, but really he's just a criminal. So raise your hand if you oppose Trump's pardon of this Minnesota individual.
Ma'am, this grandstanding nonsense
this is not grandstanding.
Exactly
this is
what
accountability.
Minnesotans hate about D.C.
This is accountability, and you are hypocrites. So again, I will take your refusal.
Thanks for demonstrating my opening
Mr. Chairman, order, decorum. She's off the rails.
Reclaiming my time. I'm not off the rails, please.
You are totally off the rails.
Nancy,
Order.
enough of your tropes. Give me
Order.
my time back.
Order, Mr. Chairman.
If Republicans were serious about reclaiming
somebody who supposed to serve me. You
restore
my constituents.
You have no time left.
You don't get to accuse me of things in this chamber.
You're out of time. You're out of time.
There's no time left.
We're done here. We're done.
Touch in out of time.
At least 10
Mr. Chair, she's out of time.
Time's expired.
Out of order and out of time.
Ms. Presley, you've already secured your
unserious.
MSNBC spot tonight.
I'm not
Your time's
I'm
required.
looking for
Chair
accountability,
recognizes Ms.
and you
Mace
want to
from
run
gonna be
from
so
the
good on
accountability
MSNBC.
Chair
of your
recognizes
king
Ms. Mace.
and this administration.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair
Chairman.
recognizes Ms.
And
Mace.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. She's going to be a great host on MSNBC. This is my
I
time.
wouldn't want to jump in front of Ms. Mace if I were you, Ms. Presley.
I reclaim my time. This is my time.
I wouldn't want to interrupt Ms. Mace. It's her time. Chair recognizes Ms.
Mr. Chair,
You're out of order.
she did not get all of her time.
Mr. Chairman,
She wants to insult us for 10 more seconds.
What do we
Your
have
time
to
is
do to
expired.
get this
Chair-
woman in order?
Her time is expired. Chair recognizes
You're
Ms.
going to
Mace.
be great on TV. You're really good. No, baby, you're not. No, baby, you're not. You are not in order. You're out of order. Goodbye. You're done.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, it's my
Chair
5
recognizes
minutes.
Ms. Mace.
Are we good here?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As I listen to the witnesses answer questions today, I'm struck by the truly breathtaking amount of fraud, the scope and scale perpetrated against the American people by Somalians in Minnesota, screeching Democrats, like you just heard, at our witnesses. Democrats on this committee don't want to talk about Minnesota fraud because Minnesota fraud is Democrat fraud. You're going to make a great host on MSNBC. You're going to be great. And this is a cover-up. I mean, the very definition of cover-up. And so while we're still trying to understand the scale of the fraud, it appears that the amount of fraud we are talking about could exceed the size of GDP in Somalia, the size of its economy is what we're talking about. So let that sink in, the amount of fraud we're talking about. My first question is this, Mr. Balyu, this afternoon. Should Somalians in Minnesota be required to speak English, their citizens? Yes or no? Should they be required to speak English if they're American citizens?
I think that question is really inappropriate.
Should they? It's not inappropriate. This is the United States of America. Do you speak English? Should Americans speak English? Citizens speak English? Yes or no?
Point of inquiry: is English the official language of the United States? It's a question.
Mr. Chairman, I'm being interrupted again by another.
That's not a valid parliamentary inquiry.
I would like to reclaim my time, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reclaim my time. That seems to be a popular theme today.
That's not a valid inquiry.
It's a point of inquiry.
Women have a right to speak in this committee. Conservative women have the right to speak here and not be interrupted by my male colleagues. Mr. Chairman, I would like to reclaim my time. I lost like 10 seconds there.
Okay, we'll give you 10 seconds.
Okay, my next question is, should Somalians who committed fraud be denaturalized and deported, Mr. Balyu?
Again,
yes
I'm not sure
no?
that's an appropriate question because the majority of Somali
So if you commit fraud
citizens.
in this country and you are here from Somalia, you don't believe they should be denaturalized and deported?
Again,
how much fraud would it take for you to want to denaturalize and deport someone who committed fraud in this country? How much?
Again,
$1 billion, $9 billion, $19 billion? What would it take for you?
Most Somali Minnesotans are citizens.
Right. And the ones that committed fraud, the question was, if you understand English, should be those who committed fraud, should they be denaturalized and deported? The Somalians who are here, the ones that can't speak English.
Yeah, so under U.S. law...
Okay, my next question for you
Can I please finish the question?
No, you can't because you're not answering the question. My next question is, this is yes or no. If you marry your brother and you commit immigration fraud, should you be denaturalized and deported? If you commit immigration fraud, yes or no?
Again, that question seems really inappropriate. And if I can get back to your question...
Well, you can't answer my question, so that's probably more inappropriate. Can you name one significant contribution to Minnesota from a Somali immigrant who can't speak English?
Absolutely, yes. But again, this is...
You didn't name one. All right, so my next questions are going to be for the Honorable Ms. Robbins. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. I heard some discussion earlier about al-Shabaab. And the discovery that you believe some of this money that was defrauded the U.S. government went to al-Shabaab. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
Yes, it's been proven.
How much money are we talking about?
You know, we don't have an amount. So there's been specific cases where it's been charged where we have an amount, but then of the millions that go to Somali over the years in remittances, a portion of that we understand is taken as sort of a tax or corruption by al-Shabaab when it enters the country.
Can you explain to us who al-Shabaab is?
It's a terrorist organization in Somalia.
And they're affiliated with al-Qaeda, is that right?
My understanding is they are.
I am on the DNI website where it tells me that since 2014, al-Shabaab has killed more U.S. citizens than any other al-Qaeda affiliate. And as of 2025, al-Shabaab, this group is al-Qaeda's wealthiest component. Can you believe that?
Yes.
And that American tax dollars through Minnesota, through Governor Tim Walz, who shamefully had to resign from his reelection the other day. Thank you to the young YouTuber Nick Shirley. This is the kind of thing that was happening in Minnesota. So I praise the Republicans who are here today from the Minnesota State Legislature exposing this fraud. And then, Ms. Robbins, when do you think Tim Walz became aware of the fraud?
I think he's been aware of it since the beginning. This was a huge issue in our state in the year he ran for governor, and the OLA reports came out, first identifying the child care fraud in March and April of 2019 when he was in the first months of his term.
Was Keith Ellison in on it too, knowledgeable, the Catholic turned Muslim guy in Minnesota?
Yes, they were all newly in office, and this was very public knowledge in Minnesota.
What role do you think Tim Walz and Keith Ellison played, his administration, in delaying investigations into the fraud?
So I've outlined several things where they stopped our ability to strengthen internal controls, and they also shut down the criminal investigations by the OIG and DHS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. I do have two articles, Mr. Chairman, that I would like to ask unanimous consent. This one on foxnews.com, Minnesota fraud probe will expand to other states. And then on house.gov, legislators blast DHS for revelations it had contracts with feeding our future fraudsters.
Without objection to order, Chair somebody else seek recognition. Chair recognizes Ms. Ansari.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to start with the UC request, an article from the Washington Post titled, "Trump Amplifies Conspiracy Theories on Killing of Minnesota Lawmaker." As we know, the president shared a video.
Without objection to order.
Thank you. So I want to start with this question for the lawmakers here from Minnesota. As you know, Donald Trump has been posting these conspiracy theories about the linking Governor Walz to the killing of your former speaker and insinuating that Governor Walz had something to do with it. Can you please raise your hand if you think this is an appropriate action by the President of the United States? Raise your hand, please.
I'm not doing a raise your hand. I'm happy to comment on it.
Sure, is it appropriate for the president to do that?
So the person who murdered our colleague, Speaker Melissa Hortman, and her husband, Mark,
answer the
had
question.
in
Do you think
his
it's appropriate for the
in
president
his
of the
vehicle,
United States
evidence saying
cause
he
violence
thought
against a
Tim
sitting
Walz
governor
was ordering him to do it? I know the facts will come out in the case, and we need to be respectful of the Hortman family, and we need to let this play out in the courts.
That is unacceptable. It is inappropriate to the highest degree for the President of the United States to be sharing conspiracy theories that are obviously going to lead to violence directed at Governor Tim Walz. Now, moving on to the issue here today, we all care deeply about combating waste, fraud, preventing corruption, and holding bad actors accountable. Unfortunately, this country has seen an unprecedented avalanche of such abuse in the past year, all stemming from the Trump administration, the most corrupt and the most wasteful administration in American history. It is truly amazing that the majority moved so quickly to hold basically an emergency hearing on the situation in Minnesota without ever one time having held a hearing on the national crisis that is the Trump criminal enterprise being run out of the White House. I don't even know where to begin. Maybe the Republican majority would be interested in holding a hearing on the $50,000 cash bribe that border czar Tom Homan received from FBI undercover agents in a kava bag. Or how about a hearing on the $400 million bribe that Donald Trump presented by multi-billion-dollar companies in the form of the White House ballroom that Donald Trump seems most obsessed with? Do Republicans have any interest in holding a hearing on that corruption scandal? Or the fraudsters and the criminals that Donald Trump has pardoned? He freed George Santos, convicted of theft of public funds. He pardoned Paul Walzak, convicted of millions of dollars in tax fraud after Walzak's mother raised money for Trump's campaign. He released the former president of Honduras, sentenced to 45 years for flooding the United States with oceans of cocaine. And these are just a few examples. I haven't even brought up Doge and Elon Musk corruptions, Trump's firing of inspectors general who are in place to root out fraud, and career U.S. attorneys who are doing the bidding of Donald Trump in prosecuting his personal and political enemies. Is there any interest in holding an oversight hearing on any of those issues? Now, I want to talk about one specifically appalling instance of blatant corruption in the Trump White House, reported by the New York Times, that the Republican majority has shown literally zero interest in investigating. This is regarding World Liberty Financial, the cryptocurrency company founded in 2024 by Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Alex Witkoff, and Zach Witkoff, among others. If those names sound familiar, it is because the company is a joint project by the Trump and Witkoff families, Steve Witkoff being Trump's special envoy in the Middle East. You may think that the president's financial interest in a secretive cryptocurrency exchange may be bad enough, but it gets so much worse than that. Emirati investment firm MGX invested $2 billion in the Trump-Witkoff crypto business, personally enriching the sitting president of the United States, his family, and Witkoff as a White House employee. This is at the same time that Witkoff is an envoy to the Middle East. He's the one negotiating with the Emiratis as an official representative of the United States government. While Witkoff and his sons were negotiating this private crypto deal, Steve Witkoff was also in charge of negotiating with the very same officials as a U.S. official to give the Emiratis something they desperately wanted from us: highly advanced and specialized computer chips. To make the corruption even more explicit, just after the crypto deal went through, Donald Trump gave his go-ahead for the transfer of hundreds of thousands of advanced chips to the Emiratis, despite the extremely concerning national security implications. It's perhaps one of the largest and most obvious corruption schemes in U.S. history, implicating a foreign government paying off the President of the United States and the White House to the tune of literally billions of dollars in exchange for sensitive U.S. technologies. So please let the Republicans spare us with their feigned concerns about waste, fraud, and corruption. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Fallon from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We're here today in this hearing because there exists damning and Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. We're here today in this hearing because there exists damning and overwhelming evidence of massive industrial-scale fraud occurring in Minnesota right now, and it's been going on for years. This is a huge story, and while many want to ignore it, deflect from it, or be masters of obfuscation, which we have seen here today, this should be a page one, front and center, above-the-fold headline for media outlets across the country. But it's not, and I think it's very interesting. ABC, NBC, CBS, you can find 74 stories today run before you even get a hint of this scandal. This should be a headline, and unfortunately, it's a back page fine print. Still, as bad as the network's coverage, albeit it's ludicrously abysmal, it's better than CNN. This very morning, CNN ran 51 stories on its website, including such riveting breaking news articles such as dogs that are trained to sniff mold, a flock of gay sheep, K-pop's newest release entitled Demon Hunters, inside glimpse of P. Diddy Combs' prison cell, and Chinese robots playing soccer, but nary a mention of the tens of billions of dollars of American taxpayer money that's been stolen from honest folks in America by scumbag thieves. This is the Oversight Committee. We should have one overriding emotion, whether it's Republican or Democrat. We should all be outraged that crooks and thieves and dirtbags are robbing the American people. So I was very curious as to see how the Democrats would play today. Would they expose this fraud and be willing to work with us, or would they go to their playbook of Donald Trump bad? And when we were in Doge, it was Elon Musk and billionaires bad. And they didn't. They haven't really disappointed. January 6th, as well, has been mentioned, has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. The ranking member's opening comments even bizarrely talked about presidential pardons, and he railed against POTUS. It's nothing to do with the matter at hand. But for the record, Joe Biden issued 250% more pardons and commutations than Donald Trump. In fact, 2,545 more. Again, back to the matter. This money's been stolen systemically by a gang of thieves, while the very people charged with the oversight, namely the Waltz administration, have been complicit. They've looked the other way. And the Democrats didn't disappoint either with ists, isms, and phobes, quotes like bigotry and hatred, and were hypocritical witch hunt. And then they were taking a hero, Nick Shirley, trying to make him a villain. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record an article, "It's Not Racist to Notice Somali Fraud."
Without objection to ordered.
98 defendants that have been charged thus far in this case, and I think it'll end up being hundreds, 85 of them happen to be of Somalian descent. It's just a fact, despite how unfortunate and inconvenient these truths may be to leftists. The Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson thinks that this fraud can equivalent to maybe $9 billion. The entire federal budget of the country of Somalia is $1.2 billion. Medicaid fraud does exist in all 50 states, but uncovering it aggressively clearly is not a blue state priority. If you talk to any expert, I was in the state legislature for 8 years, they will tell you objectively that no matter where it is, about 10 to 20% of all Medicaid spending is fraudulent. In the state of New York, they spent $96 billion. So did they recover in fraud $9.6 billion, $960 million? No, it was a pittance. It was 0.06% was recovered. In the state of Minnesota, $18 billion. It was 0.08% recovered. Representative Robbins and the other reps, thank you for coming. Thank you for your courage. You know you're going to be, smeared, and I'm not going to ask you, raise your hand. We're going to have a conversation, okay? When Ms. Robbins, Representative Robbins, when you first uncovered this tectonic fraud, what was the reaction and actions taken by the Walz administration and your Democratic colleagues? Was it working hand in hand to create synergy and offer full support and help to unmask this fraud, or did you face significant headwinds and fierce pushback to the point of opposition?
Throughout our hearings, they would either deny or deflect or say, oh, they've handled it, or they're new on the job and they don't know. So those were the answers in the tenor of our hearing. I provided documents to them outlining, as I said, in February of 72 child care centers I thought they should look at. They haven't done it. I've sent 6 FOIA requests or data requests that have not been responded to. So they have not been good partners in rooting this out.
So block votes in Minnesota in 2016, it was so close that I think Hillary Clinton won the state by about 44,000 votes. But if you have block 50,000 you can rely on in Minneapolis, that's rather helpful to win an election in Minnesota. But you know what, Mr. Chairman? Our Democratic colleagues, whether they be in Minnesota or here on this Oversight Committee, they'll eventually lure. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Bell from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member, and our witnesses for being here today. I believe in protecting our social services and recognize the need for comprehensive legislation that ensures transparency in the collection and use of federal funds to support these critical programs that serve our communities in need. The resources provided through social services ensure the welfare of the everyday person and family, and these resources and individuals deserve to be protected. These protections should come at all times, not just when politically beneficial. What we're witnessing from President Trump and this administration is an attempt to use social services and the welfare of the American people as pawns to promote their political agenda. Instead of caring for the challenges of the average person, this administration has deprived them of the very things that the president promised, which is affordable health care, housing, and relief from the rising cost of living. Through rolling back essential health care affordability, cutting funding for assistance programs, implementing harmful tariffs, and advancing legislation such as the One Big Ugly Bill, the administration's actions have ultimately caused more harm than good for the American people. Reports show that since taking office, President Trump has raised the average cost of living. Health insurance costs have risen by hundreds of dollars for the average person, with insurance plans increasing by more than 20%. Housing costs remain at an all-time high. And everyday grocery items show a steady increase, with prices rising by 15 to 20%. We cannot pick and choose when to care for the American people. The actions of this administration show a pattern. They first target our most vulnerable communities and then gut the very resources to help them. Today, it is our Somali communities and our child care assistance. Tomorrow, it could be your communities and the resources you and your family rely on for well-being. At its core, this is about the well-being of the American people. If we truly cared about those we have sworn to represent, we would be working to dismantle all the challenges they face, not just the ones that serve political interests. Mr. Baloo, President Trump has recently made comments on efforts to freeze child care funding in California, Colorado, Illinois, and New York. Would these actions benefit or harm children and families?
Oh, of course they're going to harm it.
President Trump has fired thousands of employees across critical departments and has issued Executive Order 14356, restricting agencies from filling vacant positions or creating new ones unless approved under the order or required by law. Can you speak to how these actions could harm the government's ability to root out waste, fraud, and abuse?
Absolutely. So, it's going to make it harder both to administer these services and then to identify fraud in the first place. One of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is to go after fraud. One of the easiest ways to do it is to prosecute tax crimes. The challenge that we've got right now is the administration has announced a plan to disband the tax division of the Department of Justice entirely. And that's going to make it much harder to prosecute these sorts of crimes.
And can you speak from your work as a federal prosecutor on how President Trump's actions have contradicted his promises to the American people?
Well, to the extent that this administration says that it cares about waste, fraud, and abuse, it's